Hagmann and Hagmann report for today. It's a wild Wednesday. It's the 7th day of May, May 7th, 2014. This is a live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son, Joe Hagmann, fellow investigator. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann report. Folks, you're about to hear 3 hours of unbiased, uncensored news, information, and analysis of current events. Folks, we've got a fantastic program for you lined up tonight. I was excited about this program all day today. More about that in a moment. For new listeners checking in, thank you so much for your emails from Europe to parts of, to the Philippines, to parts of Central and South America just this week, as well as all across North America, United States and Canada. For crying out loud, it's just a fantastic kind of just dropping in to say hello. We really appreciate that. For the new listeners, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base on the Internet, of course, is HomelandSecurityUS.com, and we're also simulcast, as we speak, right now, by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There, tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. I want to remind people tonight that portions of this evening's broadcast is sponsored by Nature Box. Order great tasting, healthy snacks right to your door. Forget about the old snack cupboard, the vending machine, and get in shape for the summer, which is coming. Well, at least they tell us it's coming. With the healthy, delicious treats like the Everything Bagel Sticks, stuff that I like, the pecan power clusters. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, support this show and get 50% off. That's right, half off of your first order. Again, let me say that again. Support our show and you get 50% off your first order. Go to naturebox.com/CFP radio. If you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, our home site, you'll see it on the right. It says NatureBox, kind of hard to miss. That's NatureBox/CFP radio. Our special guest tonight is Mr. Bill Salas. Before we bring him on and tell you about him, I just want to bring on Joe and say welcome, Joe, to the studio tonight.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's going to be a great show. For those of you who've been listening since we've been on the radio, you will remember Bill Salas. It's been a while since he's been a guest on the show, but sure enough, we've caught back up with him and are honored and blessed to have him back on the show tonight. He is, as my dad says, a prolific author.
Yeah, he's a radio host, a conference speaker. He's the author of Israelistine, the Ancient Blueprints of the Future Middle East, and Revelation Road, Hope Beyond the Horizon. His two timely books featuring the Arab-Israeli War of Psalm 83 have earned him the respect of many of today's top eschatological professors, actually, or people involved in the eschatology of current events. Visit Bill's website, folks, at prophecydepot.com. And if you don't have the books, Israelistine and Psalm 83, I'm going to tell you they're required reading for the Hagmann and Hagmann audience. You will find information in there that will make sense. I mean, it draws the numerous people we've had on. What Bill has done is managed to make sense with respect to what's going on with Russia, the Middle East, all of that. It makes perfect sense. But anyway, Joe, I interrupted you.
Just welcoming Bill back on the show. His website is prophecydepotministries.net. If you want to go to our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, it's on the right-hand side under tonight's guest, and I posted a link in the interactive chat room, prophecydepotministries.net. There you can find all the information, his articles, his latest radio broadcasts, his books, upcoming events, all kinds of information. Bookmark the site and keep it, as it is an important site to check daily. Bill, it's great to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Hey, thanks, guys. It was great to see you in Orlando, Florida recently, and to reconnect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, folks, we do have images we have not made public yet. Actually, we haven't put up any photographs from the show or from the conference, but Bill Salas, a dapper-looking man, and he had quite the crowd around his booth there talking with Bill, people picking his brain, and, of course, his Bill, your presentations were very popular. You did what, 2 or 3 that weekend, or?
I did 3. Yeah, that was a prophecy in the news conference. There was a couple thousand people there, and I did 3. One was the pre-tribulation prophecies, these prophecies that would occur before the 7-year tribulation period. Then I did the banquet and talked about the Israeli Defense Forces and Bible prophecy. And then I did a talk about Psalm 83 or Ezekiel 38, what's the next Middle East news headline prophetically.
All right. Well, yeah, it's everyone I spoke with, and we didn't get a chance to see. It was a crazy time for us down there. But I have to tell you, everyone I spoke to just raved about your presentation, how you put everything together. Let's start out today. You know, we turn on the television, we hear on the radio, we hear people talking about Russia, what's going on in Russia, in the Middle East. As you sit back in your overstuffed easy chair, looking at the television screen, knowing what you know, having written the books you wrote, why don't you just guide us, Bill, through what we're seeing here, and if current events are in fact mirroring biblical prophecy?
Well, I'm having a hard time sitting back in my overstuffed easy chair because all the biblical prophecies of the end times are starting to stage set and actually converge. So I'm actually sitting more at the edge of my desk seat than I am sitting back in my overstuffed easy chair. I mean, it is really a critical time right now. I mean, we can broad brush all the way through the Middle East, the current implications there. We can talk about what's going on with Russia and its bid to reemerge as a superpower. We can talk about what's going on with the blood moon phenomena. That's got a lot of people interested in what that might mean. Is God trying to tell us something through the signs in the heavens? We can talk about what's going on with America, too. I mean, we've got a critical role to play in a lot of these world events and in these prophecies. And, a lot of people are very concerned that America may not be up to the task with the current administration. So a lot of things on the horizon that have biblical implications, really.
All right. Well, why don't we just here's what I think would be great if we could pull this off. As we look at and you're right. Really, my bad for creating the image of a overstuffed chair, but we're all kind of at the edge of our seats. At least those of us who are paying attention. We're seeing Putin, the bear, and of course Russia, as you point out in your book, Israelistine as well. Psalm 83. I mean, this is what we're seeing is Bible prophecy play out. And I've got to say, folks, if you don't have a copy of Israelistine, at the very least, please grab a hold of it. It was one of the first prophetic books I read, and I got to tell you, it's like reading. Today, I had picked it up today in preparation of the show, and it's almost as if Bill had a crystal ball. Well, I shouldn't say that. It was almost as if his interpretation of Scripture is coming to pass. But Bill, what's the most important thing taking place right now with Russia, and let's build from there. What should we be paying most attention to, and however you want to handle this? Let's get right into the meat of the subject here.
Sure, and I want to make a mention about the crystal ball comment. There's an old saying that he who lives by the crystal ball walks on a lot of broken glass. And fortunately for us who subscribe to Bible prophecy as being the real deal, we don't have to walk on that broken glass. We've got the information given to us, very understandable in many cases, about the days in which we live, because the God of the Bible, who can tell the end from the beginning, who says he's the only one that can tell the end from the beginning in Isaiah 46, where he says, I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning. He authenticates his sovereignty by telling us the beginning from the end from the beginning, and he does that. He does that, and about a third of the Bible is devoted toward Bible prophecy because he wants us to be informed, because he loves us, because he wants us to be informed about the days in which we live. Now, there are a lot of Bible prophecies that are right on the precipice of finding fulfillment at this point in time. And they will conclude, of course, in the second coming of Jesus Christ to judge the Antichrist, to execute the wrath of God on a Christ-rejecting humanity, and then to usher in a period of 1,000 years Messianic kingdom. It would be much like a restored Garden of Eden scenario. But between now and then come these prophecies, which are world-changing events, and each one will come and set the stage for a bigger one to follow. When Christ talks about this in Matthew 24, and he uses the analogy of birth pangs. So in other words, what he was telling his apostles and disciples in what we call the Olivet Discourse, as they inquired to him about the end times, is that when you see these prophecies start to come in the end times, they'll be like birth pangs. In other words, before he returns to set up his kingdom, like a woman giving birth to a child, the coming down the birth canal, here comes the baby. He's about to crown, and the contractions become very intense, and they become much more frequent, and each one becomes more intense with each frequency. And so the baby comes out, and you cannot stop this whole process. So he is coming, and it will not be stopped. But the events that lead up to that are going to get one built upon another, and they're going to start to come. And when they come, they're going to come quite frequently, and each one is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, bam, here we go. It's time for the kingdom to come. So that's where we're at now. I think Russia is one of the biggest prophecies. Russia's involved in a huge prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39, 52 verses of extremely descriptive prophecy. You can read it quite literally. It talks about who's involved. It talks about it being in the latter days. It tells the reason Russia puts together this coalition. It talks about how it's defeated. It talks about what happens in the aftermath. And you really don't have to be a rocket scientist or a Bible prophecy expert to walk away from reading Ezekiel 38 and 39 and gleaning some important information. And I personally think that the Lord made it that way, had Ezekiel issue the prophecy, because it is the marquee event in the end times where the Lord upholds his holy name to a rejecting humanity of Christ. In other words, it says in Ezekiel 39, verse 7, I will uphold my holy name in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore, and the nations will know that I am the Lord. And so what's going to happen, and it's going to require an Israel to exist in the promised land. You know, God gave Abraham a promise 4,000 years ago that he would be the father of a great nation. And that's in Genesis 12:2. And, of course, to have a great nation, you need to have a land, a promised land. We're told in Genesis 15:18 that God was going to give him a promised land, and that land has never been fully occupied by Abraham and his descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and the Jewish people in totality. And that land extends from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through Iraq and Syria. And Joshua possessed quite a bit of it 3,300 years ago. David and King Solomon possessed even more 3,000 years ago. And, of course, Israel now possesses some of it, even less than David and Joshua. But they are on the move, and they will probably get more land relatively soon. That's another topic. But also God said, you know, if you're going to have a great nation, you have to have a chosen people. You have to have descendants to occupy that land, to comprise that nation. So we have the chosen people, and we have the promised land. God made this covenant unconditionally with Abraham. So the bottom line is, here comes Russia with this coalition, and we'll talk about who they are in just a moment, in the end times, wanting to destroy the Jewish people and take the possession of the Jewish people. So it requires that there have to be Israelis, there have to be Jews alive, which of course Hitler tried to stop that. The Arabs are going to try to stop that in Psalm 83. We can talk about that in a little bit. And also, so we have a Jewish people that will exist. We also have to have an Israel, a promised land. So when the Jews come back in the land, it's told in this prophecy, which we know has been going on, they'll be celebrating their 66th birthday, this May 14th. Then God is going, when the Jews come back in the land, this momentous miracle, it will be the Jewish people, the Israelis, and there will be an Israel, all an integral part of God's promise, his covenant to Abraham, and he's going to win that battle for the Jews, and he'll do it personally, not the Israeli Defense Forces, not America. We're told in Ezekiel 38, verses 18 through Ezekiel 39:6, that God stops it through an earthquake, fire, hailstone, and brimstone. And he will then say, I will uphold my holy name in the midst of my people Israel. It will be undeniable in the aftermath of this event, that he is the promise-keeping God who made a covenant with Abraham 4,000 years ago that humanity needs to put their trust in. And he's going to give them that grand show. And I think that's why that prophecy is so descriptive. So I'll let you ask a few more questions and chime in, but that's why watching Russia right now is extremely critical. It is a big, big end times event.
Yeah, and we see that build up and all the things that are going on, it becoming a superpower after the collapse of the USSR, rivaling the United States as we begin to fall. I guess if we could, talking about Gog and Magog, the biggest issue I see with people, like most matters of prophecy, you have people who, believe in different interpretations. Some say, Gog and Magog is some form of Russia, another alliance of nations. Some say it's Turkey. If we look at what it says in Ezekiel 38, it says, it mentions the prince of Meshach and Tubal. And in Genesis 10, it talks about, in Genesis 10, it's under the generations of Japhet, we have Tubal and Meshach. And if I have a New Defenders Study Bible by Henry M. Morris, and it says Meshach is preserved in the names Moscow, Muscovy, and Tubal is the name probably preserved in the modern Tobolsk and in the ancient Tiberiani, and is associated in all their passages probably ancestral to modern Russia. Is that what you believe, that Russia is the key player in this Gog-Magog war?
Yeah, I do, and you're right. It's actually seems like there's a little more discrepancy in the Ezekiel 38 Confederacy versus the Psalm 83 Confederacy, which is an entirely different prophecy and an entirely different alignment of nations. They are pretty clear through their ancestral names in Psalm 83 who they represent today, their modern-day equivalents, which are the Arab states and terrorist populations within those states that share common borders with Israel. Now, conversely, Gog and Magog's coalition, it's a little more difficult to pin the tail on who they all are as their modern-day equivalents. Now, the general consensus, we'll just line them up for your listeners, of who most of your people would put them as their modern-day equivalents. A lot of people would say that Russia and the southern steppes of Russia, a lot of the former breakaway republics of the Soviet Union, are involved under the banner of Magog and Rosh. Some people say Meshach. But again, when you get into Turkey, who's also, we believe, would be involved, a lot of people connect Meshach, Tubal, Togarmah, and part of Gomer. These are all ancient names in Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 5. And with Turkey, some people say Gomer could be Germany. I don't personally see Germany involved here. But so they got Russia, they got Turkey. Now, these are the two primary players. They're listed first in this consortia of 9 different names. The next one comes along the line is Iran under the banner of Persia. And Iran was Persia until 1935, and that's when it got its name, Iran. Then you've got, Ezekiel talks about Put, P-U-T, and that would, most of us would say that would be Libya, probably carrying over toward Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, sort of covering the northern part of North Africa. And then you've got Cush, C-U-S-H, which would be mainly probably dealing with Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, going along toward the east of Africa, sort of stretching the border of the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea. And those would be your primary people. Now, when they talk about the breakaway Soviet republics, you could have like Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and things like that in there. It's interesting that Vladimir Putin, one of his famous sayings that's being quoted quite a bit now, is that one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And conversely, what he's saying now is one of the greatest triumphs of the 21st century would be the restoration or the reemergence of the Soviet Empire. Of course, what he's referring to is as a superpower status. And presently, he is making strides in that direction. He took over Crimea without firing a shot. And some of us believe he's going to have a similar success with the Ukraine. He may have to fire a shot. There have already been some casualties with the insurgents and things going on, the pro-Russian activists. But he might be able to win some territory there by doing what he did there with the special forces and things getting in there, creating havoc. And next thing you know, there's a sentiment that sways toward Russia. And next thing you know, Ukraine's come into the fold. And Ukraine could be also involved. But those are kind of a list of who a lot of people think is involved in Gog and Magog. I mean, in the Ezekiel Confederacy.
Okay. And one thing that I was interested to see, and I'll just ask for your take on this, as we look at the current events, obviously Syria is still in play, and Libya, Northern Africa, what happened in Benghazi was directed. The attack at Benghazi, for example, there could be absolutely no doubt whatsoever from an evidential. Well, the evidence does show that the United States was in a gun-running operation along with Britain, France, and other nations to arm the anti-Assad rebels that were virtually non-existent there in Syria, much like the Bay of Pigs back in the 60s, in kind of a convoluted sort of analogy. Now, having said that, with what is taking place in Ukraine, we find internationalists, including the American Western intelligence agencies there, causing mischief in Ukraine against Putin as well. But I guess I said all that to say this. It would appear to me that the United States is certainly on the wrong side of history when it comes to Israel at the present time. And we see this push toward this peace treaty. This
is new. This settlement, and how they have, went from, we still support Israel, but there is a hostility now, where at least in my lifetime, since I've been paying attention, there never was a hostility between the United States and Israel.
Yeah, a very overt. So, without getting too much convoluted here, I guess when you look at the peace treaty or the attempts at establishing a peace treaty at the hands of the United States, are we seeing biblical prophecy here being fulfilled, or is this going to work out? Is this going to be a terrible failure? Is there going to be a blowback from all of this?
Well, a couple things here. Land for peace deals, asking Israel to cough up promised land that God is promised to Abraham and on through to the Jewish people for elusive peace with people who won't even recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, is nowhere to be found in the Bible. So from a biblical perspective, these land for peace deals are absolutely absurd. God has established the final borders of Israel. He did it 4,000 years ago, and I told you those borders to your listeners in the very beginning of the radio show here.
Right.
It doesn't matter what green line was drawn, the armistice line in 1949. It doesn't matter about the blue line that separated Lebanon and Israel. I think that was back in the 90s, might have been 2000. It doesn't matter about the red lines that Obama drew about Syria's chemical weapons, or Netanyahu's drawn about Iran's nuclear program, or Assad drew about Israel's strikes of Syria. I don't care what line, what color line, or where that line is placed. None of those lines matter, because God's will is going to be done in the midst of what seems to be all this chaos over there. And what ultimately is going to happen is a series of sequential prophecies that are powerful. Ezekiel 38 is only one of them, in which God will then have the stage set for the marquee event where he can uphold his holy name through that big Ezekiel 38 scenario. Now, what was biblically prescribed for when Israel became the Jewish state again in 1948 was foretold in Jeremiah 12. God had his own peace plan in place. So I want to talk a little bit about the scenario you're talking about, these land for peace deals, John Kerry's efforts, why they were doomed to failure, and the concerns that if they, what this could mean to America, the backlash that could happen. But I just want to take a moment to set the record clear. I was asked this question when I was on the Daystar TV show about a month ago with Marcus and Joni, and the question to me was, and this was before the peace talks collapsed, which I told them they would. The question was asked of me, what would I tell John Kerry if I was in the room with him about his Mideast peace talks? And I said I would tell him, I would read right out of Jeremiah 12, verses 14 through 17. It's not that lengthy. I'm going to just take a moment to tell you what God's plan was. It was a perfect plan. It was a compassionate plan. God knew that when this undertaking of bringing the Jews out from the nations of the world after being out dispersed in the diaspora for 1,878 years, since 70 A.D., to a homeland in 1948, he knew that was not going to be an easy undertaking. And so he had first lifted up the British Empire to be a very sovereign empire. The sun never used to set on the British Empire, and they were going to be instrumental in the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. And in 1917, after World War I, they set up the Balfour Declaration, and they were going to give Israel a homeland. But they failed to do that, and 70 years from that point forward, that was 1917, 1920, the sun always set on the British Empire. At one point, they controlled about 13 million square miles. That was about a fifth of the world's landmass, and about 468 million people they were sovereign over. That was about a quarter of the world's population. And now the sun always sets on the British Empire. They're sovereign over about 64 million people and about 94,000 or something, I think it is, square miles. So what happened is they declined. God lifts up America to become the superpower. So we were supposed to be involved in his plan to help rebirth the nation of Israel. But here's what his plan was. He said, "Thus says the Lord God, against all my evil neighbors." So he's talking about the Arabs, the neighbors that share common borders with Israel, who historically had been enemies of Israel. He said, "Against all my evil neighbors," giving us a clue to the predicament, "who touch the inheritance which I have caused my people Israel to inherit. Behold, I will pluck them out of their land and pluck out the house of Judah from among them." So we'll stop there for a minute. What God's saying there is when the Jews are going to come back into the land, he's going to pull the Arabs out from what was notoriously Israel of the past, where the Arabs had moved in there, and he was going to pluck the Jews out of Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, these places, and put them into Israel. And then he goes on to say, "Then it shall be after I have plucked them out, that I will return and have compassion on them and bring them back, everyone to his heritage and everyone to his land." So he was going to have compassion on them. He was going to put the Jews where they belong and the Arabs back where they belong, and he was going to have compassion on them. Everyone's going back to their heritage. Really was the making for a perfect plan. And then he goes on and says, "Then it shall be, if they will learn carefully the ways of my people, to swear by my name as the Lord lives," as they taught my people to swear by Baal, which was a notorious, pagan Arab god throughout time, and they continued to, the Israelis continued to be swayed over to the worship of Baal. He says, "Then they will be established in the midst of my people." So if they would learn carefully the ways of the God of the Bible, like they had taught the Jews to learn the ways of their false god, then they'd be established in the midst of his people. But this is the caveat, verse 17. "But if they do not obey," the evil neighbors he's referring to, "I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, says the Lord." Now, they did not obey. They are out of compliance with this, and they certainly don't worship the God of the Bible. They worship Allah. And so God's peaceful plan was never put into place from the Arab perspective, because immediately when Israel became a nation, and these Arabs were plucked out. They got their states after World War I. Egypt became a state in 1922. Iraq and Persia became Iran, 1935. Iraq and Syria and Jordan were 1946. Iraq and Saudi Arabia, I think that was 1930s, something like that. They all got plucked out and put in their lands, and of course Israel gets their land in 1948. But immediately in 1948, the Arabs go to war with Israel, the War of Independence. And from that point forward, you've had this refugee crisis with the Palestinian problem. That was all a byproduct of this plan not being put into effect. And so now we've got this issue. But the bottom line is, if they don't obey, God's going to pluck up and destroy that nation. And ultimately, the nations he's referring to are not in Ezekiel 38. They're in Psalm 83. That's that Arab-Israeli final conflict predicted by Asaph 3,000 years ago.
So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is the next major event on the horizon, and I think you painted this pretty well in your works, Israelistine and Psalm 83, is before anything really major. Well, when I say major, I'm talking about before anything else happens. We've got to have a confederacy of nations come down and attack Israel, much like you mapped out in your book, Israelistine. So the Psalm 83 war, so to speak, has got to come first. Is that what I hear you saying, or?
Well, okay, let's put it this way. There are actually three major events that are going to affect the Middle East. And one would be Psalm 83, the Arab-Israeli war, entirely different motives, entirely different defeats versus Ezekiel 38, entirely different confederacies. Then you've got Ezekiel 38 and 39, the big Russian Gog of Magog invasion. And then after that, you got the granddaddy war of them all, and that's the Armageddon campaign, where the Antichrist is involved with the armies of the world, trying to commit genocide of the Jews, and that's in the latter part of the tribulation. But talking about the first two, Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, I go to great lengths to explain why that really seems to precede Ezekiel 38. But with that said, you have other prophecies that are peripheral and very much integrated into Psalm 83 and probably Ezekiel 38, such as prophecies dealing with Syria, the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. It says Damascus will cease to be a city; it'll be a ruinous heap. You've got the total deterioration of Egypt in Isaiah 19. We're seeing that start to happen since the Arab Spring. You've got another prophecy, and this prophecy to me may actually precede Psalm 83. It's been vastly overlooked, like Psalm 83 was, and it's dealing with Iran, a double jeopardy for Iran in the end times. Iran, of course, is involved in Ezekiel 38 under Persia, but Iran is also involved in the latter days in a prophecy under the banner of Elam, E-L-A-M. Now, and I got a new book coming out on this in the summer. Now, Elam and Persia represent modern-day Iran. Jeremiah wrote about Elam about 2,600 years ago. He actually wrote this prophecy around 596 BC. And then about a decade or so later, Ezekiel writes Ezekiel 38 dealing with Persia. So they were contemporaries of each other, and they both wrote prophecies that would be regarded with modern-day Iran.
Okay, wow. All right, so there's a lot of things. In fact, we're seeing the structure, the architecture being built up here.
The prophetic time clock and laid out very nicely. I mean, you talk about, what was it, Bill, you said 878 years Israel was scattered, the Jews were scattered among all the nations of the earth.
1,878 years.
And to be brought back after that amount of time, having their heritage, having their, as it says in the Bible, they'd restore the language, they'd restore the land. And it's amazing to see that we are in this time. There is no denying it. You're muted, Dad.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Bill Salas, a very prolific author of Israelistine and also Psalm 83. You've got to visit his website. It's hard linked off of our website, but it's prophecydepot.com, and of course that takes you to prophecydepotministries.net. But now, having said that, the Psalm 83 book, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, what a tremendous job he's done on this, and this will fill in a lot of blanks that we're talking about. So I would urge all of the listening audience tonight to really do yourself a favor and grab a hold of Psalm 83, purchase Psalm 83. You can also buy the book, buy the DVD, buy the book and DVD, but it's going to answer a lot of questions. And again, this is our guest tonight is Bill Salas, prophecydepotministries.net, or if you linked off of our website at prophecydepot.com. Bill, go ahead and continue. Give us a narrative of what we should be looking at right now, rather than us try to fumble through questions here. I'm going to turn this over to you a little bit. Tell us what we should be looking at and seeing and such, and tell us what we need to know right now, currently, with what we're seeing.
Well, why don't we start with what I think could be the next prophetic headline? And again, when we deal with prophecy, we do the best we can to assess what's being said in this prophecy that was written. In these prophecies were written several thousand years ago in most cases. And so as we get nearer to the event and understand the description of the event, the predictions of the event, we look at it, at all prophecy really that's still impending, as if we're looking through a glass. But the closer you get, so it's a little distorted. It's hard to know exactly how it's going to play out. The generation that experiences the fulfillment of the prophecy is a generation that can tell us exactly how it played out and when it occurred. But prophecy also is to alert us in advance. So we look through this glass, and the closer we get to an event, the clearer we can see that event versus the farther reaching events. Now, to me, one of the biggest events that's probably on the horizon is Iran's nuclear program has got to be dealt with. Geopolitically, that is a big problem. So we look to the Bible and try to figure out, well, is there something said about that? And we don't. And we got to be careful about what's called newspaper exegesis, where we don't just look at current events and try to pin the tail on Bible prophecies to see which one might fit and stretch it into our little cubbyhole is what we think it means. We don't want to do that. That's absolutely terrible to think about that. But these prophecies are so descriptive as we get closer to the event. You have to have your newspaper open and your Bible open because they are glaring. Now, what I'm watching right now is it says in Jeremiah 49 verses 34 through 39, dealing with Elam, that Elam is going to be struck at the foremost of its might. The bow of Elam is going to be broken, and it's going to be struck at the foremost of its might. And the bow, Elam was known to be expert archers in Isaiah 22. It's dealing with Elam's strongest point of probably its nuclear program here. And this is where Elam is, just so your people can envision this on a map. Elam represents pretty much where the Persian Gulf is, where Iran meets the Persian Gulf, and the central southern part of Iran, separated by the Zagros Mountains, which separates what was used to be ancient Persia, sort of the rest of Iran, with the west side of Iran. Now, that's where the Bushehr nuclear plant is today. In Elam is the Bushehr nuclear plant. It is the least checked, least monitored nuclear facility in the world. It is the longest, to my understanding, it took the longest to construct. It was started by the Germans, and then they had to vacate in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution occurred. Then Iran tried to piece it together subsequently, and ultimately contracted Russia to come in and finish it. So you got three different sets of parts working on this thing, and it's built on severe tectonic plates. So we're very concerned an earthquake could trigger it, like a Fukushima. Studies have been done that said if there's a huge earthquake and there's a nuclear disaster, which would be pretty much inevitable in a bad situation, that it could be worse than Chernobyl and Fukushima. It could be of epic biblical proportion. Also, if Israel strikes it or anybody strikes it, at this point in time, because it's loaded with Russian fuel rods, it really could create a nuclear disaster. This is a great concern, and this is why it's important. It then goes on to say in the next verse 36 of Jeremiah 49, that after it's been struck, this area has been struck, that there's going to be a worldwide dispersion. There's going to be exiles that have to flee, and they flee to every nation in the world. It says there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam will not go. So there's going to be a strike in this area. This has never found fulfillment. I point out that all this in my new book coming out in the summer, and it hasn't found fulfillment, and it involves a strike that produces probably a humanitarian crisis, and you have these exiles of Iranians that have to flee into different nations of the world. Now, it's interesting. I was on a TBN Praise the Lord program with Jonathan Kahn in 2013, and sitting next to me was a guy, former Iranian. He's a Christian now, and he's His name is Reza Safa, and he is with Nejat TV, N-E-J-A-T TV, and they reach in through satellite networks, through TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network, into Iran, and they preach the gospel. They're coming in over the head of the mullahs, and they're experiencing one of the biggest revivals in the world. Per capita, Iran is the number one evangelical population in the world. There was about 500 Iranians who believed in Christians before that believed in Jesus before 1979. Right now, their estimates are at least 1 million, maybe upwards in the neighborhood of 3 million or more. It's hard to monitor. And what Reza told me on the TV show, and he holds up his iPad before we go live in front of millions of people, and he asked me if I've seen this prophecy. And I said, yeah, I am. I'm familiar with it. He goes, do you realize that a lot of Iranian Christians are looking to this prophecy so they can get out of the repressive grip of the Islamic regime? And because it says there'll be no nation where the exiles don't go, the outcasts of Islam don't go. And I said, Reza, I said, wow. I said, the next verse talks about this being a disaster because Iran has fiercely angered the Lord. A disaster comes upon them. This is not Ayatollah Khomeini standing at the borders passing out visas singing Kumbaya. I said, now, in God's mercy, he might, of course, allow a lot of these exiles to get out, a lot of them being Christians. And he said they want to get out and preach the gospel to the nations of the world. So what a miracle that would be. But, I mean, this is a big deal, guys. I mean, Iran right now is going to probably be struck. And God is going to deal. What's going on in Iran is fiercely angering him. This is what causes this prophecy to be caused. It goes on to say 3 more things. It says in the end, though, verse 39, in the latter days, this is why we connect this to the latter days, I will bring back the captives of Elam, says the Lord. So in other words, like the theme of other prophecies with the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the Assyrians, after this disaster occurs, effectively here with Iran, then there'll be a remnant of Iranians who will be brought back into the Messianic kingdom. The Lord will restore the area and bring them back out of the nations of the world like he's been doing with the Jewish people out of their diaspora. There's a diaspora that's going on with Iranians right now that seems to be a precursor to this prophecy. There's several million Iranians that left when the Shah was deposed in 1979. They've been fleeing. It's difficult to get out of Iran, but they've been fleeing, and they're all over the world right now. Matter of fact, there'll probably be the network through which these future exiles will have to cling to and go to for safekeeping. It's just an amazing phenomenon, guys. So Iran is probably going to be struck. And I've talked to, I was talking to Yoram Edinger, who is a diplomat in Israel. He's a former consulate general to Texas. He's done ambassadorial work over here to Israel. We had a couple of breakfasts together this December 2013. And I said to him, is Israel going to strike Iran's nuclear sites? And he said, look, let me give you the comparison. He said that when Menachem Begin was the prime minister of Israel in 1977, he was the first Likud prime minister. He had to deal with Iraq's nuclear program in Osirak. And he said at the time, now remember, Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq at that time, and he was building a nuclear program. And the West was supporting Saddam Hussein at that time because Saddam Hussein got in a war with Iran in 1980, and we weren't going to support the Iran because they had the Islamic regime, so we're supporting Saddam Hussein. Now, that war went on for 8 years, but what happened is they were building a nuclear program in 1980, and Menachem Begin got all of his people together, his generals and all of his trusted confidants, and put them in a closed-door meeting and said, I need you all to tell me what would be the possible outcome, every scenario, if we strike Iraq's nuclear program. And they all said to him that we can't do it. It would be dangerous. We would bring the whole Muslim world down on us. We would bring the whole Western world down on us because they're supporting Iraq. And they gave him all these reasons why you don't want to do that. And Menachem Begin stood up afterwards and he told them all, thank you so much. I know your heartfelt, sincere, everything you said was brilliant. He said, but I got one question for all of you. And he said, what is the cost of inaction? And that is the destruction of the Jewish state. He said, we will strike. And they went out and they struck and they took out Osirak. So here we go. They've got a precedent for striking nuclear sites. They struck in Syria's potential nuclear site in September of 2007. So pretty much Netanyahu is faced with the same problem. Even though Iran is Shias predominantly, and there's a schism between Sunnis and Shias in Islam, you strike an Islamic country, you do bring the rest of the Muslim countries down on. There's a good chance that could create an issue for Israel. Of course, Iran could call Hezbollah to start shooting some of their 60 to 100,000 missiles into Israel. Also, the Western world is trying to broker a deal with Iran right now. Could really bring the Western world down on Israel and a lot of anti-sentiment to them. It's just a real bad situation, but really the cost of inaction is too big of a deal. And Benjamin Netanyahu is, now when you start hearing him talk, he's talking about we've got to stop the manufacturing of ICBMs, the delivery mechanism for an atomic weapon, and the enrichment of uranium. We cannot allow them to manufacture uranium anymore, their nuclear program. Two things, the delivery mechanism and the nuclear program itself. So, something in my estimation is going to break, and we can't kick this can down the road anymore. Iran's nuclear program is a big deal, and it looks like they just had a recent explosion over there in Iran. Some people think it was a nuclear site that was not really mentioned to the negotiators. That the verdict's not out on that yet. Just a bizarre situation. So I think we need to watch Iran right now. This is a big deal.
Yeah, and for those wondering, yesterday there was a report that an Iranian nuclear facility exploded, and there was not much other information, at least from what I didn't look into it too much, and when I talked to Bill before the show, he said that the information was spotty, but we know that the nuclear scientists in Iran have been being systematically assassinated, taken out of the way, and that the program has been given a boost by the Obama administration and allowed to continue, and they lifted the sanctions and the holds on the money and released that back to Iran. Very troublesome sign as an American sitting here wondering what side are we on.
Well, yeah. Israel has been covertly trying to stop Iran or slow down Iran's nuclear program. You have the Stuxnet virus several years ago, that mysterious virus that really affected their centrifuge spinning, which no one had their fingerprints on. It was so cleverly done, but it turns out in retrospect most everybody's fingering kind of a joint effort between Israel and America. You had nuclear scientists that have been assassinated. This explosion that happened yesterday was at the Kavzin, we might want to call it a nuclear facility. We don't know that yet. It's supposedly, Israel's Channel 2 had reported that a while back that there was an unreported nuclear site at this Kavzin area, and this explosion occurs. Now, whether it was a nuclear site or not, we don't know yet, but you're getting conflicting reports out of two of Iran's news agencies saying that there were injuries. One was saying there were, some was saying that the other one is saying that there's been some very serious injuries and a big explosion with a huge fire going on. Now, what could this be? Maybe it was just an explosion of a weapons factory or something like that. But it could also very much mean that Israel, if they cause the explosion, we don't even know that, is trying to let the world know that Iran's not telling everybody everything. And so, again, that's utter speculation for your listeners. I'm not saying that is a nuclear facility, and I'm not saying that Israel did that. But at the same token, Israel has been acting covertly, and at some point is probably going to have to act overtly to deal with Iran's nuclear program.
You know what, Bill, what I find interesting as we talked here for the last 45 minutes is boy, I'll tell you, this is extremely hard for anyone, at least in my estimation, to deny. I mean, having been an investigator for the last 28 years, I'm looking at the Bible, and I'm seeing from the early days, from 70 AD forward, everything just kind of being set up to where we're at today, and it's beyond coincidence, and it's all mapped out for us in the Bible. I mean, we got here, as you had mentioned too, the Iranian Revolution of 1979, just as an example, created this explosion of Iranian refugees that is laying the groundwork for the potential for future refugees as well. I mean, it just seems like this is like a very like a symphonic, orchestrated play that we're watching, and I don't mean that in any demeaning sense, but a very well orchestrated plan that is going right down the line of fitting right Bible prophecy. It's just, to me, it's amazing to see this and to sit back.
It's interesting. There are only two places in the Bible, apart from, well, we'll say three, where we're told where God will establish His throne. One of them is in heaven. Heaven is God's throne presently. But we also know from Jeremiah that the throne of God will be established in Jerusalem. When Christ comes and reigns in the Messianic kingdom, His throne will be in Jerusalem. There's only one other place in the world that God says He will establish His throne. And I'm going to ask you where you think that is in just a moment. But let me give you a hint. It's not America. And I know a lot of Americans think that God thinks so much of this country that He's sitting in heaven draped in the American flag singing the Star-Spangled Banner. So their first thought might be, well, gee, it's got to be America. God, that's got to be the only other country apart from Israel where it says God will establish His throne. And that's not the case. Do you know where that other country is?
No.
Okay. Well, it's Iran. It's in that prophecy of Jeremiah 49, dealing with Elam. In verse 38, Jeremiah 49, I will set my throne in Elam and will destroy from there the king and princes, says the Lord. But it shall come to pass in the latter days, I will bring back the captives of Elam. I'd read that earlier. There's a guy right now named Hormoz Shariat. We did a couple TV shows together when I was in Dallas, reaching into Iran. He also has a satellite TV program that reaches into Iran, and he's discipling Iranians over there. Joel Rosenberg calls him the Billy Graham of Iran. This guy is incredible, and his mission statement on his it's called Iran Alive Ministries, IranAlive.org, I think it is, could be .com, and his mission statement is transforming Iran into a Christian nation in this generation. And since we're in the last days and we have this information here, that's not that far-fetched. Ultimately, it will be a Christian nation. The captives of Elam will come back. But, of course, they've got this Jeremiah prophecy to deal with, and they've got the Ezekiel 38 prophecy with Persia involved. Iran does. But it says He's going to set up His throne in Elam. Now, whether that's a literal throne, whether it's a spiritual scenario, I write about this, and I show my research, and I get into the Hebrew words and things like that in my new book coming out. But I think we're seeing a glimpse of this right now. We're seeing God's movement in Iran right now amidst this repression. And these people are coming to the Lord in groves. And they're coming into the Lord through just a few important means. One is miracles and healings. Others is getting Bibles smuggled in at the high cost of being thrown in jail and severely persecuted. I mean, they're not peddling drugs here, they're peddling Bibles. And the other thing, what's probably having the most big effect, of course, you got satellite TV reaching in, is dreams and visions. Right out of Joel 2, where it talks about in the latter days, I will pour my spirit out on my men servants and maid servants, and young men will dream dreams, and young men will have visions, and old men will dream dreams. They're coming to the Lord through these miraculous endeavors, and this is how it had to work. God knew that when it came down to the end times and the repression that was going on and the apostasy going on, that He was going to have to take personal responsibility through these types of means, these miraculous means, to bring people, to reconcile them to Jesus Christ, because He wishes that none would perish. It's an amazing situation. It's happening in China. It's happening in Iran. It's the Acts 2 model of building a church. They're meeting in homes. They're breaking bread together. They're reading Bibles together. They're praying together. They're having fellowship together under the cost of great peril. And I'm trying to let people know in America, this is, America tends to think, hey, we are the church. And I'm telling America right now, America tends to be a bit problematic, and where God is really active right now is in these other places. And when we were on this TV show, I was saying a couple sentences, and he would translate them, and then reaching out to these Iranians, and we were talking about the blessed hope of Jesus' return, rather than having to hope in this disaster in Elam as their exit strategy out of Iran, because some of them are so impoverished they can't afford to get out. A lot of Iranians are getting out because they're able to get into Turkey, where you don't have to have a visa for 3 months, and then they try to get out from Turkey into other parts of the world. They go there. There's home churches they can go to, and they get discipled and stuff. But it costs a lot of money to get out, and some of them get stuck there for years. A lot of them just return back to Iran. We were talking about the blessed hope of the rapture and explaining it to them. And I said to Hormoz, I said, this is the blessed hope for them. They hope this will happen for them so they can, get out of this repression and be with Jesus. And I said, but in America, what the blessed hope seems to be these days is, I hope he doesn't come just yet. I got too many other things to do. I got a child to raise. I got a wedding to put together. I got to send my kids through college. And I tell Americans, look, the wedding you should be concerned about, I'm not trying to say weddings aren't important. The wedding you should be concerned about is your wedding as a believer with Jesus Christ, because times are going to get real tough real quick. And you just be keeping your eyes open and your heart open for Jesus to return, because I personally believe in a pre-trib rapture. And that's where we're at. I mean, it's just a critical time on the Earth's timeline for Christians.
Very interesting. Yeah, the subject of the rapture, Bill, obviously, as you well know, is a very contentious subject. Pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, pre-wrath, and so on.
One thing we can all agree upon is that there will be a time when dead in Christ will rise first, and those that are left will be snatched up. And there's implications that some say that there's 2 appearances of the Lord, one where he doesn't touch down on the earth and people are gathered unto him, and one where he does. But there is a confliction there, but we say it's not a salvation-bearing issue. Read, study, show yourself approved, pray, and ask the Lord for what he wants you to know about it. And that's the most important thing we can do. But it is a very decisive issue, and it's
divisive.
It's almost like throwing a hand grenade in a lunchroom at times when people bring up the topic, and it doesn't have to be that way,
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Doug.
I just wonder why it is that way. No, I don't want to necessarily go down that road too far, but why among the men of God and the women of God is the subject of the rapture so divisive? I don't understand that, Bill. I really don't.
Right. Well, the thing is, the rapture in itself, if you read that and you don't have faith in Christ and really believe that promise is true, and we're talking about what's said, and Joe quoted parts of it in 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 through 18, and 1 Corinthians 15, verses around 50 and 51, that Jesus is going to come when the Heavenly Father says it's time to go catch up your bride to be with you. He's going to come in the twinkling of an eye, which during Paul's time when he wrote was, he didn't have nanoseconds. It was the quickest measurement of time you could put together. And he said it's going to happen like in the blink of an eye. And there's going to be the shout of an archangel, the sound of a trumpet, and the dead will be caught up first, those who believed in Jesus who have passed away. And then a generation that's alive and remaining that believes in Jesus will be caught up with them to be together with the Lord forever in the clouds. Now, of course, the timing of that becomes critical. But because this sounds like to the unbeliever, this sounds like pie in the sky. You've been watching too much Star Wars movie, this type of event. But to the believer, it's the ultimate reward of one's faith. It is called the blessed hope. And the timing, it gets divisive. Some people think, it could be pre, it could be post, it could be mid, etc. And I put in my book, Revelation Road, the reasons for pre-trib rapture. There's all kinds of other places you can go and check out the timing if someone's interested in that. But I would say this, and we're told in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 18, that, after speaking about the rapture, Paul said, comfort one another with these words. In other words, the rapture is to be comforting information, and it's hard to comfort someone, the bride of Christ. That's a typology for believers, Christ being the bridegroom. to tell them, look, Christ is going to get you. Be comforted, but you're going to go through 7 years of the most hellacious time in the world during the tribulation. He's going to receive you when you're battered and bruised, broken legged, black-eyed, and all your hair's pulled out, and that's when he'll come get you. So be comforted with that information. That's just one of the arguments for it, but there's a whole bunch of them. But I would say this, which is interesting. After he's talking to his disciples in John 13, telling them that he's going to pretty much die. He says, you'll only have me here for a little while longer, and then I'm going to go. And where I go, you can't come, but you'll come eventually. I'm paraphrasing all this. And he's trying to tell them to be comforted, to love one another, and this sort of thing. And then he goes into verse 14 and he says this, trying to comfort them still. This is at the Passover meal. He's talked to them, and he says, let your heart not be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And he says, in my Father's house are many mansions. Now, if it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. So what he says right there in John 14, verse 2, is that 2,000 years ago, on the eve of him being crucified, he's trying to comfort his apostles, and he says, look, in my Father's house, in heaven, there exist mansions. They're already there. They're already in place. I'm going to go there. And now, for your listeners, picture the most wonderful neighborhood you've driven by or may live in that exists. It's a nice community with all these homes and things like that. Christ is saying, look, let's just picture that's what he's talking about, where his Father's house is. In that neighborhood, there are many nice mansions there. They're already there. I know. I'm Christ. I've been in heaven. I'm going there. And I'm going there, and I'm going to prepare a place. In that neighborhood, there's a lot that's vacant. I'm going to prepare a place for you in that place. It's beautiful. And if it wasn't true, I wouldn't tell you. I'm not lying to you. And then he says, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. Of course, Thomas says, well, how do we know the way? Whatever, well, the way, of course, later we find in the verse, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's belief in Christ that through our faith that he's going to take the believers out to be there. So Jesus is preparing a place right now for his church. He's going to come and get them. He's going to take them up there. It's going to be unbelievable. He's excited about it. This is all part of the whole Jewish wedding model. How the groom would propose to the bride. He would pay the price. It was called the moher. This is traditional Jewish wedding model. He would prepare he'd pay the price, which Jesus did on the cross for his bride. He paid for our sins. And then there would be this period of preparation and separation. It was an indefinite period of time, usually about a year. And while this period was taking place, the groom-to-be would go to his father's house, his land, and start to prepare a place for them on this land to go fetch his bride, who meanwhile she's at home preparing her trousseau, her wedding garment, getting ready. She's excited, waiting for this time to come where she can be with her groom. That represents us waiting here for Jesus to come and get us. We're told in Revelation 19 that our garments are the righteous acts of the saints. So every righteous act that a saint does in the spirit is actually stitching another stitch on their wedding garment, spiritually speaking. So, you have this period of separation and preparation. Jesus is preparing his place. And then when the place is done and the command is given, the groom would come with a friend or some friends. It's exciting. Noise would be had. They're coming. They're joyful. They're coming to get the bride. She can start to hear him coming. She's excited. Usually she has, her bridesmaids around. They're kind of with her a lot, quite frequently visiting. And all of a sudden he comes to get them. Well, what does that say? Jesus will come in the twinkling of an eye with the shout of an archangel. That's his friend. There's going to be a noise. There's going to be the sound of a trumpet. He's going to fetch his bride and catch her up. And so then he takes the bride. They go to to what they call their chamber for a period of consummation, where they consummate their marriage. And that's for a 7-day period typically, where outside some things are going on. You've got the celebrations going on, but they're alone. They're in there for 7 days. A lot of people teach that as being we're taken out for the 7-year tribulation. And then after those 7 days, you have the celebration period where they come out and celebrate with everybody. And of course, that would represent the Messianic kingdom. So it's just an amazing situation when you look at it from a Jewish wedding model. And to me right now, I listen every night when I pray to see if I can hear the divine carpenter pounding in a few finishing nails on our cabinets up there in our mansions in heaven. I think we're that close, guys.
Yeah, we definitely are living in the last days. We can see all the signs that are around us. And with that, Bill, we're up against the top of the hour break. We're going to go take that now and be back in a few minutes. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, May 7th, 2014, with our very special guest, Bill Salas. His website, prophecydepotministries.net. Bookmark that site. You can get all the information from his latest articles, audio reports, where you can find his books. So much information. You're not going to want to leave that one out. We'll be right back after these short messages. Stay with us.
Hi, folks. Doug Hagmann here for Nature Box. When they...
Gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report this Wednesday, May 7th. We are joined by our special guest, Mr. Bill Salas. His website is prophecydepotministries.net. He is the author of many great books, Israelistine, Psalm 83.
Revelation Road. Oh,
yeah, and
fantastic.
Bill, can you tell us about your book, your latest book that will be coming out shortly?
Yes. It's a working title right now. We don't have it pinpointed just yet. It's probably going to be called Nuclear Showdown in Iran, the Ancient Prophecy of Islam. And if your listeners are with you during the first hour, we talked about it. We kind of did some commentary on that. And inside of the book, and it's going to be short and sweet, unlike some of my other books that are 300 plus pages. This will be a couple hundred pages. And it's really just introducing the reader to a prophecy that's been vastly overlooked dealing with Iran. People who are, many people are interested in what's going on in Iran right now, but the people who have sort of been watching Iran and trying to pin it up in prophecy, they've gravitated towards Ezekiel 38, because Persia is clearly in that prophecy, and that represents Iran. So what I'm trying to do is let people know, look, there's another prophecy dealing with Iran. It's critical. It probably could be the next thing on the radar, and it could be dealing with Iran's nuclear program. And the ramifications of this prophecy are staggering, not only to Iran, but to the Middle East and also to America. Iran has threatened numerous things: terrorism on America, striking Israel if Iran gets struck, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. You've got the Black Oil Triangle in that area there with the Gulf Arab states and Iran, where about 50% of the world's oil reserves come through there. This is a big situation, and dealing with Iran right now is not an easy situation for Israel if they happen to be going to strike Iran. So I think we're going to see Iran's nuclear facility struck. I point out all this research I've done, why this prophecy has not found fulfillment yet. I look at every possible argument, and there aren't very many of them because not many people have paid attention to this prophecy. It's a revealing of an ancient prophecy. And so I'm real excited about it. It's coming out this summer. It's going to be a quick and easy read, and it's going to put the reader right into the current news about what's going on and how to prepare for this potential event.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, I know you're very gracious with your time. Why don't we get into? We both Joe and I could ask many questions, but if you don't mind, take us where we should be focusing our attention on. You mentioned the blood moons. What significance, in your estimation, are these blood moons? We've had people talk about we've had guests come on and talk about the blood moons, but tell us your feeling of their significance.
Okay. Have you had some of the stronger advocates of the blood moons and experts like Mark Phillips or John Hagee? Have you had them on your show yet to talk about them? Or?
Mark Biltz, we've spoken with him, and we have his book. I'm trying to think if we had him on. Did we have him on, Joe? I thought we did. Mark Biltz, Blood Moons.
I'm pretty sure we did.
You know what?
After the conference from Orlando, Bill, we had so many people, speakers from down there that came on the show. It's hard to actually remember, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
Won't even admit that because we're usually pretty good at this stuff. We had Russ Beirut on for the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we had. I don't think we had Jonathan Wright on. We did not have Mark Biltz on yet.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry. He is. I'm looking at two different pages. He is scheduled to be on or scheduled to be a guest. But what's your take on the Blood Moons here?
Okay. Well, the Blood Moons may be significant. There are some pros and cons, and we need to introduce both the pros and cons to your listener. Now, if they're significant, and I lean to the fact that they could be, this would put a huge sense of urgency on everything we've been talking about and everything we're about to talk about, because they could be signaling signs in the heaven about powerful events to come to the world. Now, the way we preface this is we look to Genesis 1:14, Genesis 1 verse 14, and in that verse it says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years." Three purposes there: to divide the day from the night, and for calendar purposes. But it also, in the middle there, talks about for signs and seasons, and the Hebrew words are off, meaning a beacon or a signal, and moed, meaning appointed times or feasts. Mark Biltz, who wrote the book called, one of the books about blood moons, he says these are dealing with the feasts of the Lord, the feasts of Israel. And so what we have here is, the way I would interpret that, is that you have heavenly banners displayed at divinely appointed times. And so therefore it's sort of God's Amber Alert system to humanity. Pastor John Hagee wrote a book called The Blood Moons as well. He calls them God's high-definition billboards to heaven. So the point would be, if God wanted to communicate a message to man, what would be the best way to do that but through the heavens, right? So what we have with these blood moons, they're not, they're a lunar eclipse. This is what we're dealing with here. We've got a total lunar eclipse. This is when the sun, the Earth comes between the sun and the moon in its orbit. And because it's standing between the sun and the moon, the rays of the sun get blocked out by the Earth, except the red rays penetrate further and reflect upon the moon. Normally that turns the moon into a kind of a deep red look. Now, this is one of the cons of it, okay? Some of the naysayers are saying, look, not all lunar eclipses are red. Some of them are orange, and some of them are kind of yellowish. So just for your listeners to keep that note. But that's the phenomenon. Now, there's been since the time of Christ, and one more thing to say, when they come in a sequence of 4, that's called a tetrad. And there's been probably, I think there's 80-some tetrads since Christ first came. There's only been, I think it's 8 tetrads that have happened since Christ came that have happened on Jewish feast days. Now remember, we go back to Genesis 1:14, dealing with the Feast of the Lord Day. So there's been 8 of them that have happened on Jewish feast days. Now, the last 3 seem to have been extremely significant. They all may have been significant, but the last 3 have been extremely significant. When you had 4 of these come, a tetrad on Jewish feast days, big things have happened for dealing with the Jewish people. And this is what Mark Biltz and John Hagee point out in their books. Now, the last 3 happened on Passover of 1493 and 1494, and on Tabernacles of 1493 and 1494, back to back. They happened again in 1949 and 1950 on Passover and Tabernacles. They happened again in 1967 and 1968 on Passover and Tabernacles. And I'm going to explain why they might be significant from the historical precedent of why we're looking at those dates. But here's what's going on right now. They're happening again. One of them has already come on Passover of 2014 on April 15th. The next one comes on October 8th, which would be Tabernacles, the feast day, on October 8th. The one that follows in the Tetrad number 3 coming up here would be in 2015 on April 4th. And the fourth one, the last one, is on September 28th, 2015. Now, everything I'm telling you is been confirmed by NASA on their Eclipse website. So they keep track of all these things, these dates, historically. They tell you they can predict what's coming on in the future as well. Now, I've been on this website, and it's very important to note that there will be no more, these other guys have pointed this out, and I searched it out myself. There'll be no more tetrads, full lunar eclipses, coming in a sequence of 4 on feast days of Israel for the whole rest of this century. So if these are significant, if God is trying to tell us something through this sequence, this could be very critical, because I'm going to quote to you in a moment something that talks about a blood moon that signals that the day of the Lord is going to follow right behind it. So this does talk about a sense of urgency. Now, we had one recently come. We got another one coming in October. And so when we look back at these events that have happened, we can look at the period of what happened with respect to the Jews and the persecution they went through, how they were delivered through that persecution, and how they were given a safe place to be to worship God and observe these feasts of Passover and Tabernacles, and these blood moons may have had something to do with that. So before I get into that, are there any questions so far about the explanation of the blood moons?
I think that's a fantastic foundation for the blood moons. Go ahead.
What Mark Biltz and John Hagee point out, and I wish they had done a little more research on the previous 5 blood moons that date back, even before these last 3 we're going to talk about. Let's go back to 1493 and 1494. They point out in 1492, the Edict of Expulsion was going on in Spain, and that's when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were persecuting the Jewish people. Now, John Hagee, in his book, he does a really good job. He's quite a historian to really make comparisons of this persecution to that of what was going on at the time of the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, it almost sounds like some of the tactics Hitler learned from came back from what was going on to the Jews in 1492. So here you have the situation where these Jews are experiencing this persecution, unjustified, in Spain. They had to convert to Catholicism, or they had to be persecuted, or just exit out of Spain. And so Christopher Columbus, as you know, who many of us believe was a Jew, although that's not germane to the point I'm making here, he filled up 3 ships. There were a bunch of ships out in the harbor there in Spain. 3 of them you know about historically, the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. We believe were filled with affluent Jews, but regardless, Columbus sets out, and he tries to find the West Indies, and he ends up finding America. It turns out, as we look back on America's history and why God established his nations, we come to realize that there are 3 primary reasons that God established America. One of them was to be a safe haven for the Jewish people. So, coincidentally, all of a sudden, I'll say providentially, Columbus finds America, and now we've got presently about 5 million Jews in America. Israel recently surpassed America with 6 million Jews, but the nearest other country with a large population of Jews is France, with about 483,500. So clearly, America has been a safe haven for the Jewish people. So let's look at maybe what we can look at and glean from this 1492 episode. The Jews were unjustifiably persecuted by the Gentiles. They were divinely preserved through that persecution by God. They ultimately found a safe place to be after that persecution. At this point, that becomes America. So therefore, on the Passover and Tabernacles that followed in 1493 and 1494, they could freely worship their God and celebrate his prescribed feasts because genocide was not committed. They survived because of God's protection. Okay? Now you jump up ahead about 450 plus years into 1949 and 1950 when the next blood moons occurred. What was going on? Well, in 1948, just before the blood moons came, you had the War of Independence going on between the Arabs and the Jews. Now, That was unjustified Gentile persecution of the Jewish people. And it happens to be committed not by Spain, but by the Arabs of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the Palestinians, the Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq. All those people, by the way, are in Psalm 83. Those are all the nations involved in the Psalm 83 prophecy, the concluding Arab-Israeli war. So we had a precursor of the fulfillment of Psalm 83 in 1948. So what do we have? Israel won that war. There was unjustified Gentile persecution. Israel comes into the land. They are outnumbered, outmanned, outflanked. Are you still with me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I just got some pop-up here. I thought I might have lost you on my Skype. They were unjustifiably persecuted. There's no way they should have won that war. The enemies had advanced fighter jets. Israel had a few private planes, which they opened the cockpit and strategically dropped some hand grenades and glass milk bottles on certain targets. Ultimately, they won that war. What happens? They get Israel, they survive. So the same kind of lesson could be repeated here. Unjustified Gentile persecution of the Jews in 1948. Divine empowerment preserved through that. Ultimately, what happens? They get Israel, a safe place to worship their God. And so on the Passover and Tabernacles in 1949 and 1950, what can they do? They can freely worship their God and celebrate his prescribed feast. Now, let's jump ahead to 1967 and 1968, which is when the next tetrad occurred on Passover and Tabernacles, those 2 years. What do you got going on again? Well, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, part of Psalm 83, supported by the other Psalm 83 countries, they come to invade Israel, and you had a 6-day war in June of 1967. Now, you had a Passover before that. I don't know the exact date, but you had a blood moon on that Passover, and then shortly thereafter you had this war, again involving unjustified Gentile persecution of the Jews. The Jews did nothing to deserve that. What happens? They win that war in 6 days. And what happens? They get more Israel. They almost triple their size. They get the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Sinai, the Gaza. They get East Jerusalem. And so what could be said in the aftermath when they're celebrating on the blood moons are occurring on Tabernacles and Passover? They were unjustified persecution. They were divinely preserved through that persecution. They were given a safer, more land to be in. And what could they be doing on those feast days? Freely worshiping their God and celebrating his prescribed feasts. So what could that mean for the ones coming up? One has already come. Now when we talk about this, these seem to be more like signs, not necessarily specific dates and things like that. And I say that caveat because, there's reasons to think that maybe these aren't as significant as we would think. So we don't want this to be a Y2K or a Mayan calendar thing, but they deserve an honorable mention because they could be significant. And if they are significant, as I conclude, you're going to hear why that is very urgent and important for us to be watching these. Now, if historical precedent is followed with these coming blood moon tetrads, here's what we could see. And this is a piece I wrote, the summary I wrote in a Chuck Missler news magazine, his April newsletter. He had me write a featured article on the signs in heaven. And here's what I say after everything I just told you guys. This is what it could mean. There could be more unjustified Gentile persecution perpetrated by the Arab populations of Psalm 83. This oppression could manifest into another war intended to destroy Israel, but it could result in the decisive defeat of the Arab enemies by the Israeli Defense Forces, as clearly outlined in Psalm 83. As the ultimate victor, the Jewish state could capture even more land and increase the defensibility of its borders. Perhaps the world will witness the final fulfillment of Psalm 83 during this blood moon interval. And I point out in my Psalm 83 book that Israel, in the aftermath of a victory, does seem to expand its borders into Jordan, parts of southern Lebanon, maybe down into parts of Egypt. These are all parts of the land God gave to Abraham. We talked about this in the first hour of the program, which goes from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates. So these things could be significant, and here's the thing to note. Now, although some of these blood moons, like for instance this last one on April 15th, that just happened, was not seen in Israel. It was seen in America and parts of North and South America. It wasn't seen in Israel. And the naysayers say, well, see, this may mean that it's not significant. Israel didn't even see it. It still occurred, and it occurred on Passover, but wasn't witnessed by Israel. But the last one is what they call a super blood moon on September 28th of 2015. A super blood moon means because the moon is at perigee with the Earth. It is its closest point to the Earth in its orbit that it can ever be. That means it's going to be huge, and it will be seen in Israel. And so the Jews are going to see this last blood moon, the last of the four of a tetrad for the rest of the century. And here's what it says in Joel 2, verses 30 through 31. It says, "And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord." Now, if he's talking about a blood moon, a lunar eclipse, and if it's relevant to a sign for us and for Israel, this is the last one in a tetrad for the rest of the century. And it says here, if this is the one being referred to here, it comes before the great and awesome day of the Lord. Now, the day of the Lord, it's commonly taught, is a tribulation period of 7 years, whereby God executes his wrath on a Christ-rejecting humanity. It could be next year that we see the final blood moon, and that therefore, shortly thereafter, and that doesn't mean next year or 10 years down the road or whatever, it means the day of the Lord will follow. It could be promptly, but it could be, a year, 5, 10, we don't know. But it signals possibly that the day of the Lord is coming, the tribulation is coming. And that's why these blood moons are getting a lot of attention, because they're a phenomena, and God might be trying to communicate something to man about, what's going on in the world right now. Jewish persecution, they survive it. And the other thing that's of concern is that what could this mean for America? Because America didn't get its superpower status because of our granddaddy's good looks. We have two other purposes. I talked about one, to be a safe haven for the Jewish people. Another was to be instrumental in the rebirth and protection of the nation Israel. And Harry S. Truman in 1947 actually, was one of the world leaders that helped get Israel legislated through the partition plan, the United Nations, to be rebirthed as a nation. And 3, we were to be a beacon of Christianity to the nations of the world. And America, throughout the church age, has probably been the most instrumental nation in accomplishing that feat. So 3 important purposes for America that God established us for, and built us up with the resources to be a superpower country. Now, we have fallen far from our graces, and we have become very immoral. I don't know the number. I think it's like 60 million abortions. I mean, some outrageous number. Immorality, pornography, all these things going on, homosexuality. We're redefining the DOMA Act, the Defense of Marriage Act, which says that one man should be married to one woman, which is right out of the Bible. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave together with his wife, and the two shall become one. All these things are going on in the country that have many Christians concerned. And secondly, we're putting Israel in a precarious position, trying to force them to trade land for peace. This has been going on with George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George Bush Jr., and Barack Obama. And, we're putting Israel in a bad situation, which means our foreign policy to Israel could come under scrutiny by the Lord, because it says in Genesis 12, verses 3, that those who bless Abraham, goes on through to Israel, will be blessed. Those who curse Abraham and his descendants will be cursed. And we've got to be careful that how we treat Israel and how we fulfill our responsibilities as a superpower, that we stand beside Israel. And right now, many of us are very concerned that we may be on the wrong side of this fence if there's a war in the Middle East and that sort of thing.
Bill, it just amazes me how we have evolved have evolved our position on Israel, being such a friend of Israel back in the mid-20th century to where we are today, where we've got an arguably, I don't want to say a Muslim president. I don't believe he's Muslim, but I believe that he's got the Muslim agenda, the Islamic agenda, by way of his actions, clearly, from the Islamization of Europe and all throughout the Middle East. it's conversationally speaking with you, Bill. It amazes me how much of a turn that we have made, and how much of an abandonment we have, how much we have abandoned Israel, and when instructed to, not to do so. It's right in the Bible. Again, we're just having a conversation here, and it just strikes me as being a fatalistic blow toward to me, it's for our actions or inactions, however you might perceive it, the hand of protection, the hand of God's protection is being taken away over America, and I think we're going to suffer the fate of that. Is America in the Bible? Is it referenced in the Bible?
Well, I think we are. Let me say something that's going to be kind of a staggering thing to think about. These blood moons, which we're in the midst of them, one already came, are going to occur during Obama's watch. They will have come completely and concluded on September 28th of 2015, and Obama's in his lame duck presidency throughout all that from now until the end of that year. They will also occur during Vladimir Putin's watch, because there's not going to be another Russian election until 2018. Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of bothers me to have these two guys in place while these blood moons are occurring. If they're significant, barring any unforeseen circumstances, they will be in place. Now, when you talk about his American Bible prophecy, that's one of the questions that probably at the top of the list of what we prophecy guys get asked in the Q&A sessions at these churches and prophecy conferences. Where's America in the Bible? And that's predominantly asked because we're hard to find in the Bible. Americans are concerned about the direction of the nation, where it's turning, and three, that they think we're living in the last days, and therefore, they want to know what they can find out about the fate of this country. Now, it's troubling because it is difficult to find America in the Bible. You can find Gaza in the Bible, a 146 square mile area. You find it in the End Times Prophecy, Philistia, the ancient Philistines in Psalm 83. You can find Gabal in Lebanon. Who's ever heard of Gabal? I mean, that's an ancient name in an area up in Lebanon. Russia's in the Bible, in Ezekiel 38. Egypt's all over the Bible. Israel's. I mean, a lot of places are in the Bible, but America is hard to find in the Bible. And that is concerning. What happens to America to go from the greatest superpower status ever to being scarcely, if even, found in the Bible? Now, I personally think we are in the Bible. Matter of fact, in my new book, I'm going to put where I believe we're in the Bible, and it's also in my DVD called America and the Coming Mideast Wars. And I put forward good biblical and geopolitical arguments for America being in Ezekiel 38, not in the coalition with Russia that invades Israel, and not coming to the rescue of Israel, but on the sidelines as protesters. There's a group involved in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, called the Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions. Sheba would be Yemen, Dedan would be Saudi Arabia. Merchants of Tarshish would more than likely be the UK, and their young lions would be the colonies that sprung out from the UK once upon a time, and of course that would include America. And what's going on is we're sitting there saying to Russia, and this is how we even find out part of the goal of Russia's evil plan, to invade Israel for plunder and great booty, to take over livestock and goods, gold and silver, in other words, to confiscate Israel's prosperity. We find us sitting there saying, what are you doing, Russia? Are you coming to do these things? Are you? And the theme of commerce is there. You have the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions. So someone is wanting to have commerce with Israel, and probably got contracts with Israel. Israel, of course, is a burgeoning economy. I mean, they're finding natural gas, or they found two big deposits of natural gas. One of them is going to make them energy independent, and the other one's going to make them a significant energy exporter. So we've got America and UK probably wanting to have commerce with Israel, and here that's being threatened by Russia's attempt to try to invade Israel and confiscate their wealth. Now, when you look at who Russia puts together in their coalition, you've got Iran, who can blockade the waterways of the Persian Gulf, the main artery that Israel would want to get commerce out. You've got Turkey to the north of the Mediterranean Sea. You've got Libya to the south. Of course, you might have Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria, also in the northern part of Africa. They could blockade and cause problems for Israel to export commerce through the Mediterranean. You've got going down through the Red Sea, the other waterway. You've got Ethiopia and Somalia down through there. They seem to be part of Ezekiel 38, and they could prevent Israel from getting commerce through, the Red Sea. So every important waterway that Israel would need to get commerce out to the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions is potentially blockaded by Russia's coalition, which is predominantly Muslim, and they'll be extremely upset with Israel. They already are not fond of Israel, Iran, Turkey, Libya, etc. So, you're seeing all these things stage set. So from America's perspective, we're concerned, why are we on the sidelines being, protesters? Why are we not being more forceful? Why are we not protecting Israel? This is the concern that those of us who believe America is in this prophecy have. Does something happen to us? Is it the rapture? Does that compromise this country? Of course, it certainly could. What about an EMP hitting this country? That's certainly of concern. Recently, one of the heads of the Department of Homeland Security came out and said, America is not prepared for an EMP, sounding the alarm that we should be prepared for it. And he said it wouldn't be that hard to prepare for it, but we're not putting the funds together to protect ourselves for it. An EMP could be caused by solar explosions. It could also be caused by a nuclear weapon floated 180 miles up high and at a burst altitude over the country, which could happen with North Korea, Russia, who knows, Iran, if they get a nuclear weapon. Newt Gingrich talked about an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, in his campaign for president, in the prior election. So this is a legitimate threat. What else could it be? Could it be hedonism, terrorism inside of our country, putting us on lockdown? What goes on? What could it be? All these things are in play right now.
Man, I'll tell you, it's the way things are setting up. Katie from Nova Scotia has a question here concerning. You had mentioned something about Israel at some point, and Bill, I heard you talk. We had talked about this. In fact, in our last interview, I know you addressed this, folks. Psalm 83 and Israelistine, folks. You've got to grab a hold of those books via Bill Salas's website. But her question is this: this Russian or this invasion of Israel refers to an Israel that's living in relative peace, unwalled villages, and so on and so forth. If you can restate or if you don't mind, go back through, how does that comport with the Israel of today? There's got to be a breakdown of this. In other words, Israel would have to expand. And is her question basically, is that the Psalm 83 war, or is that some event that would precede that, as we had discussed and you had referenced earlier in the first hour?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. The Ezekiel 38, before I came out with my research on Psalm 83 back in Israelistine in 2008, and it's been updated in the Psalm 83 Missing Prophecy Revealed book, came out in 2013, which, of course, updated things since the Arab Spring and got into talks about prophecies in Egypt, in Syria, and Iran, etc. The focus was primarily on Ezekiel 38. Russia, and legitimate reasons. Russia's relationship with Iran, Iran's hatred of Israel. There's just numerous reasons to think that Ezekiel 38 is definitely stage setting at this point in time. But what I pointed out in my research, as this gal is asking, is a very good point. In order for a prophecy to find its fulfillment, every detail given in that prophecy has got to be fulfilled entirely as specified. And we are given descriptions in Ezekiel 38, verses 7 through 12, of several prerequisites that Israel has to be living in those type of conditions before this prophecy can happen. I'm going to list them for you real quickly. There's about 8, 9 of them. And you'll see that some of them are existing right now, but almost half of them are not. First of all, we're told in those verses that the prophecy occurs in the latter years, and the general consensus is, we're in the latter years. The latter years, for the most part, probably began when Israel became a nation in 1948. That's when the world hourglass probably made its final spin. Now you've got, they've been be brought back from the sword, could mean persecution. Of course, the Jews were persecuted throughout their diaspora. It could also mean relative to Psalm 83, but they have to be brought back from some form of persecution. We could say that's happening. We'll give that a check. It says to a land, Israel, which had long been desolate. Well, we know that was the case. It has been desolate for centuries. Mark Twain went over there in the late 1800s and wrote his book called Innocents Abroad and said, who would ever want to go here? This is a wasteland. He said more than that, but in other words, it was desolate. Check marks on all those. But then we get to a point where now the other specifics get a little more questionable. One is they have to be dwelling in the midst of the land that had long been desolate. Well, that land Ezekiel was probably talking about was not the partition plan of 1947, which gave Israel that little strip of land it's on right now. The Abrahamic covenant gives them land from Egypt, Nile to the river Euphrates. The center of that land is really Jordan. Now, it could be the midst of the land is dealing with the literal word tabur, center, midst of, right in the middle. Could be dealing with the Israel of today, but I point out in Jeremiah 49 and elsewhere that Israel will someday possess Jordan. And I believe they possessed Jordan in the aftermath of their victory over Jordan in Psalm 83. Ultimately, Israel will get all of the land, but not all of it probably until Jesus comes and divvies it out to them. But I think they'll spend incrementally between now and then, as they have done since 1967 and during David's time and Joshua's time. Now, maybe they're dwelling in the midst of the land, maybe they're not. The next one, though, they have to be a peaceful people dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates. Now, here's where it gets real sticky. The Hebrew word for dwelling securely is yeshav v'taz. And the precedence for it in several scriptures is it's a military security. It's a security that is achieved through a military conquest. In other words, I've defeated my enemies. Now I can take a deep breath. I can tear down the walls, and I can dwell securely. Now, that Israel does not exist right now. They've got a 403-mile partition wall that separates Palestinian terror out of Israel proper. At some points, it's 25 feet high. They've got a security fence that courses through the Lebanon border, through the Golan Heights, through Egypt. They've got walls all over the place, and they have to because they do not dwell securely, because the Arabs who are involved in Psalm 83 don't recognize them as the Jewish state and pretty much want to do what Psalm 83 verse 4 says, cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. They fought against Israel. They voted against Israel becoming a nation in 1947. They fought against Israel in 1948, 1967, 1973, and a concluding Arab-Israeli war, to me, is in order, and probably fairly soon, in fulfillment of Psalm 83. The peace talks have collapsed. Hamas and Fatah are forming a unity agreement. They are involved in Psalm 83. The Palestinians and the Philistia area, which is where the Hamas are in the Gaza. I mean, this stuff is stage setting. This has to, when Psalm 83 happens and Israel defeats their Arab enemies and the terrorist populations within those enemies, Israel can dwell securely. And they could rapidly tear down their walls. They will no longer need them. So I look at that as a literal prophecy and literal aspects of that prophecy. Now, the other thing, it has to be a very wealthy nation, because Russia's coming after great plunder and great booty. And the Hebrew word there is shalal, meaning it can be also interpreted with the spoil. In other words, to come to take spoil from the spoilers. In other words, it could be dealing not just with Israel's inherited resources and natural wealth, but also with plunder and booty that they could take Arab spoils of war. The question that I pose is Israel that wealthy right now that carrot on the stick, that Russia would form such a formidable coalition? We've talked about who was participating with Iran and Turkey and Libya, and there's nine different members listed, to come against little tiny Israel today. Now that would be like Canada, Mexico, and America. Barack Obama saying, look, New Jersey, which is about the size of Israel, saying to the rest of America, look, New Jersey's not buying into my health care plan. I got a problem with them. We need to get Canada, Mexico, and all the rest of our states to come against New Jersey. And then Middle America saying, America saying, we don't need to do that. We can just take Middle America. We don't need all the rest of America and the rest of Canada and Mexico to take out New Jersey. But all of a sudden, New Jersey wins that war, expands into Middle America, takes over the police departments and the nuclear department and the resources and the wealth. All of a sudden, now we need Canada, the rest of America, and Mexico to come against that expanded greater New Jersey. And I think the comparison can be made with Psalm 83. At some point in time, the little tiny Israel we know it is going to be a greater, safer, more prosperous Israel. And I point out the scriptures that point that out in my Psalm 83 book.
I got to tell you, that analogy that you use, that mental picture of New Jersey, Canada, Mexico, United States, the rest of the states, and then the expansion thereof, to me, that's key. And what a great mental picture that creates for those attempting to understand the conditions under which Israel is said to exist during this time of travail. So extremely interesting. Now,
well, let me just add to that,
go ahead.
Doug. That's
Sure.
a good point. You know, right now, some people would say, look, okay, we could see in theory how that would work, a greater Israel. But to become that prosperous Israel is only about 6 million Jews there. You know, they don't have the manpower to really get in there and exploit all the resources and do that sort of thing. But we need to remember, at some point in time, there's another several million, I don't know the exact count, maybe about 8 million Jews out there in the other parts of the world, 5 million of them here in America roughly. When Israel's a greater, safer place, a land of opportunity, if you will, Jews should flock over there, and then the manpower will increase and the ability to expand. They'll no longer be calling them settlements where the Jews are trying to expand right now. They'll be calling them Israel territory. There could be a campaign. I forward this thought in my novel Revelation Road, that there could be a campaign somewhere along the lines of come back to Zion, you know, come back to the heart of your homeland. It's greater, it's safer. I'm paraphrasing. You know, I could see the Ministry of Tourism putting that forward once it's, you know, because they're going to want Jews to come back. They want Jews to come back right now. The problem is they can't facilitate the growth that's going on. They've got to move them into the settlements, which the world wants Israel to stop doing. They're calling Israel occupiers. But Israel's got to move these people into the settlements. They're still coming over to Israel. They've got to assimilate them. They've got to get them places to go. And as I said in the earlier program, it doesn't matter what we call those things. It doesn't matter what Obama calls those things. If they want to call it occupied territory, it's God's land, and God's going to move them into it, and he's bringing the Jews over there. That's part of his plan, and they're going to have places to live, and that's the done deal. He's going to make it happen. So it doesn't really matter what the lost international community thinks about what's going to happen over there. They're disconnected with God's foreign policy in Genesis 12. God's going to do what God's going to do, and anybody who gets in the way is going to be hurt. And that's why it says in Zechariah 12 that someday Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone to all those who try to move it. It will fall upon them. And that's the issue. They're trying to carve up Jerusalem, and that just ain't going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And my concern for Jerusalem, and by the way, Bill, I don't know how much, I know you know a lot about this, but I don't know how much weight or stock or even attention we should put into this. But, you know, I've been hearing, and I receive emails from people who are saying, you know, the temple, the third temple is they're preparing to build the third temple, and you know, the preparations are being made for the final establishment of the temple, and of course Jerusalem. Any quick thoughts on that, or any thoughts on that at all? Is that something? Is that more of an anecdote rather than a talking point, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's important. It's going to happen. The Bible references a third temple. It's in Matthew 24. The Antichrist is going to go in it around verses 15 through 19. He's going to abominate it. Revelation 11 has a measuring rod. They're measuring the temple. It's a tribulation temple. It's going to happen. And they are already preparing for it. They've got the table of showbread ready. They've got the priestly garments ready. They're training the priests. Everything essential to that is pretty much ready. There's a couple problems. One main problem is that the foundation stone, which is where the Holy of Holies was, has got a big gold dome sitting on it. and it's controlled by the WAQF, W-A-Q-F, which is under Jordanian control. When Israel won and took over East Jerusalem in 1967, they foolishly gave control over that to Jordan. But that's going to come down. I think after Psalm 83, my personal opinion, I'm not going to be able to point a scripture out on this, But I do believe that Israel, when they win the Arab War, that mosque is coming, that Dome of the Rock is coming down, as is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they will take control of the Temple Mount. You realize right now, when you go to Israel, you can get up to the Temple Mount as long as there's not some problems there, because there are often problems on the Temple Mount. You can get to the Western Wall and things like that, usually no problem. But getting up to the Temple Mount, where you got the Dome of the Rock and that sort of thing, can be a little more challenging. The Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, they want to get up there. That's why they go to the Western Wall. That was the wall closest to the Holy of Holies. So they want to get up there, but they're not allowed to bow down. They're not allowed to pray. So what happens when they go up there, they toss a few coins as if they dropped them out of their hand by mistake, so they can bow down to pick them up and say a prayer when they're bowing down. And they get on their cell phone and act like they're talking on their cell phone so they can say prayers when they're close to the foundation stone. It's just unbelievable. It is going to happen. It's going to happen. It's probably going to happen relatively soon. These prophecies are coming. And, when you talk about, I'm often asked, what is the most important sign of the end time? And, certainly the rebirth of Israel is critical. But I think what the most important sign is, and my friend Dr. David Reagan has put this in a book he's written called Living on Borrowed Time, great book, is that the number one sign that most of the prophecy guys are starting to point to right now, that we're in the end times, is not one sign, but all the signs. All the end time signs are converging right now upon humanity. They're all happening. They're all stage setting. They're about ready to happen, one upon another like dominoes. That to me is very telling. We are right at the deepest point of the end times, getting ready. And that's why these blood moons could be extremely important. We could be that deep into this right now.
Wow. It's great to see how you put that all together. By the way, I did not realize how you described about the dropping of the coins and the bowing down to pick them up and talking on the cell phone to pray. I didn't realize that was, for whatever reason, I don't know. I just didn't really think about that. But folks, I hope you found that bit of information. Some might call it trivia. It's certainly not trivial. Wow, an amazing thought, or an amazing. I just never really gave that much thought. But okay, I can see where wow. And that makes sense to me. Now things are beginning to make sense. You're connecting some, and you have connected some extremely sensitive and important dots, to be sure. Look, I want to be very generous with your time. You've been generous with your time with us, and originally you were going to stay for 90 minutes. It's been really a full 2 hours. Before we cut you loose, and we could talk for hours and hours upon hours, I want to give you a chance. Is there anything that we've missed that we should cover before we cut you loose this evening, that you think we should reemphasize or emphasize perhaps?
Yeah, there's two things. One is a huge lie has been perpetrated in the Middle East, and that is that the Palestinians have any right to Israel. It has been perpetrated by their Arab cohorts. This is all part of the Psalm 83 situation. And when the Palestinian refugees who have been living in this squalor and these tough situations, and I feel for them, Jesus loves them. He loves everybody. But when they realize that there is not going to be a Palestine, they will attempt to lay siege on Jerusalem. That's right out of Zechariah 12, verse 2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness, or trembling in some translations, to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. Not if, but when. There's a time coming when the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left, it tells us more in Zechariah 12, the Arab countries that surround them, in Psalm 83, they will attempt to lay siege on Jerusalem. Diplomacy has failed. The peace talks have collapsed again. Nothing new is brought to the table. Hamas and Fatah are coming together. This is about to happen. This is going to happen. They are going to realize in desperation that the only way they're going to think they can get a Palestinian state is to fight for it. And this is what I believe Psalm 83 is about. We are going to see that happen. And when that happens, it could happen in our generation. It could happen very soon. It could be preceded by Iran, a strike on Iran's nuclear site. It could be preceded by or part of the destruction of Damascus. we're not talking about, small events here. We're talking about world-changing events, and the world will never be the same once these things happen, because one thing's going to come right after another. And the reason we can know these things with some fair degree of description is because a loving God gave this information to the Hebrew prophets throughout time and put them through Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and all these prophets to give information to our generation about the days in which we live, because he loves us and wants to know about this so that we can prepare our lives. And our natural response to that should be to love and worship him and to receive him and to walk right, redeem the time, get rid of personal sin, and live a life of holiness and be watchful and witness in every opportunity that God gives us to a hungering world that's watching the same news that we're watching, that needs to know these things that we know right now, because the time is now, the hour is now, and Jesus Christ loves everybody, knows the number of hairs on everybody's head, and wants them to be redeemed, that none would perish and have everlasting life. And Bible prophecy takes us to that point of recognition that here we are, and it's a loving God that gave us this information, who is not caught out of control. He's not caught off guard by what Russia's doing. He's not caught off guard by the fact the Middle East peace talks collapse. International leaders don't have a clue about what's next. They don't know what to support in Egypt. They don't know what's going on with Syria. But God does, and he loves everyone. He's got Syrians. I would suggest to you that amidst all this chaos, Syrians are coming to the Lord in the refugee camps. They're out of Damascus, which is about to be destroyed. Now, whether God wanted it that way or whatever, I'm not going to say, but I'm telling you this. Amidst all this chaos, he's bringing people to the Lord in Iran, in China, in Syria, and we need more of that going on in this country. That would be my final word.
Praise God, indeed, and it's amazing to see the hand of God in all of this. We might think it's the act of man, but it seems to me to be the hand of God directing and choreographing this. Bill, what a fantastic presentation tonight. Your
Absolutely.
book, Israelistine and Psalm 83, folks. If you don't have those books, and it seems like we're always promoting books, it really does. But these two books will connect the dots for you on Middle East events, and even to the extent of America's role in the Middle East events. Bill, I want to thank you so much. We want to thank you so much for spending your time tonight with us. It's been just such a fabulous pleasure to have you. We've learned a lot. I can tell you that. I'm just blown away by your.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let's do it again.
Oh,
sure.
Indeed. Anything coming up? Are you planning on speaking anywhere soon in the United States or? Well, anywhere.
Yeah, I've got. I'm trying to restrict some of the speaking so I can get my book out for the summer. But I've got be in Springfield, Illinois, with Tommy Ice and Don Perkins and Nathan Jones on June 5th through June 8th. They can see that on my website. And then we'll be in Pikes Peak, Colorado, with the Prophecy in the News Conference with Mark Phillips and Bill Koenig and Gary Stearman and a bunch of people on. Tommy Ice will be there as well. That'll be on July. I think it's around July 25th. These events are on my website at prophecydepot.com.
All right. Well, very good. Bill, thank you so very much. God bless you, and certainly we'll do this again. Again, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. God bless you, my friend.
My pleasure. God bless you both.
All right. Folks, that was Bill Salas. Go to HomelandSecurityUS.com. Click on the link to his website. And folks, you've got to, seriously, Israelistine, one of the first books that really made the events in the Middle East make sense to me or for me. And then, of course, Psalm 83. I've got them both right here, looking at them as we speak. Fantastic works. And, of course, he's got DVDs. But definitely visit Bill's website. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report up against, well, actually late for the top of the hour break. What else is new? We'll be right back after these brief messages. Stay with us. This is a live broadcast. Of course, it is the 7th day of May, 2014. Doug and Joe in studio.
And this is the third and final hour of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, May 7th, 2014. Our first 2 hours we were joined by Bill Salas, author extraordinaire. His website is prophecydepotministries.net. If you missed the first 2 hours, definitely go back and listen to it again. He's written books like Israelistine, Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, and also the one I keep forgetting to mention,
Revelation Road.
Yeah, Revelation Road.
That's a fictional book about a grandfather and a grandson. It's a heartwarming story. It's a great story. Yeah, what an intelligent man. And isn't it something? And I realize I got a couple of emails here from people talking about the rapture, Joe. And when we say it's not an issue of salvation, it's not doctrinally. It's not a doctrine that if you believe or disbelieve, that will cost you salvation. Now, I know I'm painting this with a broad brush, but what I'm saying is it's divisive. I believe because it's misinterpreted. But one of the things that I see here with this is the potential, anyway, is the pre-trib believers have a, would there not be a possibility if the rapture does not take place where the threat to one's salvation or belief would be? Is it not possible where they would think, well, wait a minute, they would have to reevaluate their belief system? Is that kind of the way to say it, or I'm just curious as to what?
Yeah, I mean, it does. From what I see, it, people believe, the scriptures say that no prophecy is a private interpretation. We know that God is not the author of confusion.
Exactly, and that's very well said. And I defer. And let me I just want to say this, and I'll turn it back over to you. I defer the interpretation of Scripture, and let me be very clear on this. Having spent a lot of time talking to Steve Quayle, a lot of times talking to Pastor David Langford, I defer their interpretation on any issues such as that to their discernment and their evaluation. That's not a cop-out on my part.
I disagree. I appreciate their opinion, but I will have to defer to Scripture, as we all should.
Ultimately, yes. Ultimately, yes, you've got to. Well, the ultimate authority is Scripture. But if you're looking for a corporal or a man's interpretation, then I would defer to them. And that's just me. So, but I prefer not to go down this road, only because we will enter into circular arguments and get none of the analysis of news discussed. I'd
just like to say a few things on the rapture, but not really on the rapture, just in general in Scripture alone. Regardless, and this is one of the issues you asked. What is it about that is threatening the belief system? We're told that we are to wait patiently for the Lord's return. We're told that there's going to be persecutions, there's going to be sufferings, there's going to be all these things that happen that are bad to people who are Christians. And it even says in the Scriptures that those that are going to carry out this persecution believe that they are doing it in the name of the Lord. And we are told specifically in Scripture, whether there's a pre-trib or post-trib rapture is irrelevant, that we are to be study diligently and to show ourselves approved. We are to be ready to understand and speak sound doctrine. We're to have a relationship with the Lord. We're to be obedient. We are to be not only, and this will sound odd to some people who don't and have not read the Scriptures, but we are to be joyful in tribulation and persecution. And I think it's in Thessalonians. It talks about...
Well, yeah, Steve and I were talking about that early this morning. I mean, he called me at his time, 5:30 this morning. And essentially what he was saying is people who will persecute people like him and other Christians, what did they do to Jesus? Find, lift up your heart because they're doing that, the same thing they're doing to you as they did to our Lord. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, it says in here that there are days of darkness that are coming. There's attacks that are coming on the people, but we are instructed on how to live holy, and to pray without ceasing, to quench the spirit, not the flesh. And we are told that persecution will come, and when this comes, in 2 Thessalonians 1:5, it says. We'll start at 1:4. It says, "So we ourselves glory in you, the churches of God, for your patience and faith and your persecutions and tribulations that you endure, which is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God, that ye may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which ye also suffer, seeing it is a righteous thing with God to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you, and to you who are troubled rest with us. The Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels." And it goes on to talk about, be counted as worthy, counting all things as good pleasure. Don't let anything in this world knock you off your spiritual journey, your spiritual walk with the Lord.
Oh, of course not. No, of
whether
course not.
It's a, your dog died or you're being persecuted for your faith. And that's just the rapture or no rapture. That's how we're told to live. Now, if we follow those guidelines and we're obedient and we do these things, then we're reading Scripture, we're praying, things will be revealed to you. Each and every person does have opinions, but we know how useful opinions are, and even our opinions most of the time, some of the time. It is to the person who experiences it, who goes through it, understands it the best. Anyway, let's get into the news.
Well, yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this is what I find most interesting is I could speak out against abortion and receive an email from somebody who believes in Planned Parenthood. I could speak out against homosexuality and receive an email from someone who's a militant, radical adherent to the homosexual agenda. The most hateful emails I get are the people who call themselves Christians. And Gary, you're one of them. And I'll tell you right now, I'm absolutely over your emails. Now, having said that, some of the most hateful emails are from so-called self-proclaimed Christians about a doctrinal issue or about a scriptural issue. And I'm talking about hateful emails. So,
hateful emails for speaking out against abortion?
What I'm saying to you is, Joe, is very simple, and people have to understand this. When we have an intellectual discussion, we'll say about abortion, how wrong, how morally incorrect abortion is, and how sinful it is, and it's against God's word. I will get the occasional email saying that I am incorrect. Both, I'm incorrect in how they defend it. It's convoluted, but it doesn't contain the hate, the vitriol that these some so-called Christians. Gary, I'm talking to you directly as well. And if I never get another email from you again, that'll be too soon. Okay, so you can stop sending those emails. But I guess what I'm saying to you is it
like a box? You just have to see what's inside, or do you just read the emails?
You know what? I've just been deleting them because I'll check them occasionally, but the common thread is basically vitriol and hate. But what I'm saying to you is the self-proclaimed Christians out there who say, well, look, they can't have an intellectual. Some, I'm not saying all, but some can't have an intellectual discussion. It's either
your way or the highway.
You believe this, or you're damned to hell. And that there's no, period.
And there's no Christian or what we would call godly love among Christians who disagree.
I ain't feeling the love.
I ain't feeling
love. No, not at all. I'm not feeling the love here.
And that has to be worked out on an individual level. Each person, what we need to do, if we come across that, is pray for those people and forgive them, because they're the ones, obviously, who are suffering. To attack other people, other brothers in Christ, as one would say. That shows me that they're hurting more than the regular person. And you were talking about the abortion thing. I know we didn't get a chance to cover this yesterday. There was a lady.
No, you mentioned it yesterday, but it's absolutely incredible.
We see
the
people
celebration of abortion
who come out and speak against abortion are saying, being called woman haters. They're starting a war on women. They don't like women reproductive health freedom. This lady had an abortion and celebrated it by putting a video of it on YouTube.
Not the abortion itself, but the celebration following the abortion.
And I didn't see, aside from, the regular alternative media who mentioned it or wrote about it, I didn't see any. I guess I didn't watch too much, but I didn't hear, it wasn't in the paper, it wasn't in, it was on very few select sites that covered this. And even in the alternative media, are people afraid to come out against this because of the propaganda machine that comes after them? Or is it something of non-concern anymore? People don't think that it's a big deal? I could shoot a pregnant woman in the stomach and get charged with 2 murders, but you can go ahead and kill the thing that's in your stomach and you don't get charged with...
The thing that's in your stomach? No, it's
the fetus,
it's
the baby.
The fetus in your uterus, in her uterus.
I didn't mean to say it like that.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to sound overly corrective, but when we're talking about this, or the abortion thing, it's not a thing. It's a satanic practice, really.
It's a satanic sacrifice.
Exactly. And to see it take place is, and I hear people say, for example, well, abortion, it's the law. It's, my body, my choice. Who says abortion is okay? Well, the Supreme Court said it's okay. Study why and how that came to be, and I think people would be surprised about that. But
a piece of news I want to hit, the headline on Drudge, main headline on Drudge for most of the day, FCC chair warns conservative media like Drudge Report and Sean Hannity, which I guess if you're going to put Sean Hannity in a category with somebody, it'd be a polar opposite of Drudge, face regulations. And it talks about how they want to, govern and create a stricter internet and what they're going to allow media organizations to do, to say, to back. They want a tighter, they call the new media the internet. And you heard Hillary Clinton say it last week, she says it's basically all entertainment. None of it's fact. None of it's real journalism. Only what you see on TV is real journalism.
Exactly.
But I see this as an empty threat. The only way they could regulate the internet is to shut it down. They can't run the government health care. They can't run the government.
But let's think about this for a moment. They can shut down, and folks, this is important because I've talked to sources who are watching the planning of this take place, and here's what they're looking at. They're looking at separating the commerce part of the internet outside of the news part. For example, companies will do business on the internet, whether it's your banking or whether it is or a lot of logistics companies. All companies do business over the internet, including now your healthcare records. So what they're attempting to do is to make this line of demarcation, to take the news organizations like ours, like True News with Rick Wiles, like Alex Jones, Drudge Report, and take those and separate them outside of the internet Eventually, this is how it's going to happen. Eventually, so does the internet have to be shut down? Of course not. And why do we think that this has gone to the international body?
It at some point it will have to be shut down, because you cannot have people communicating to each other what is going on in different parts of the world as everything comes crashing down, as things are exposed for what they really are, whether they're biblical, whether they're systems of this earth.
No. Let me correct what you said here. The internet will not have to be shut down. There'll be a state or nation-state sponsored line of or method of communication, or architecture or structure of communication that will be called the internet, but it'll all be from the nation at the nation-state level, aside from the commerce. So you will not be able to voice your opinion. Think of a newspaper.
See, I don't see that happening. What are they going to do? Fine you until you?
Well, you won't be able to post. I mean, look. Think of a newspaper.
I'm thinking of this show.
Well, wait a second though. Think of the internet as the New York Times, just as an example. Are you able to write for the New York Times? You can write a letter to the editor, right? But I mean, you can't write a story, correct?
Right, but the way I see it...
But wait. But they've got the classified section, right? So you can
pay, yeah.
Okay, but so you
do anyway.
But what I'm saying though is you see where they can take everything but the commerce and the state-sponsored news away from the internet.
Absolutely,
and that's how they're planning on doing it.
But there are ways around that. I mean, if we wanted to, if, say, this broadcast got shut off and we had a really important topic we had to talk about, we could set up other means of communicating this broadcast within a matter of minutes through websites, I mean, I just don't see how.
Okay, you're not thinking big enough. You're not thinking. You're not thinking Okay, so in other words, I guess what I'm saying is you're talking about websites. What all of a sudden you're going to use
like Ustream or there's lots of different.
What makes you think Ustream would still be functional outside of the nation-state level?
I don't know. If not, they'd have to. It wouldn't just be conservatives or alternative media. They'd be shutting everybody off.
Well, correct. Well, of course, they would be shutting off the. It would be nothing but propaganda. Like I said, think of the New York Times. You cannot. You can live in New York City, or USA Today, for example. Do you have any editorial input into the USA Today? What stories fly? Of course not. But can you write a letter to the editor, an opinion? Yeah, you might be limited to 140 words. But the bottom line with this is how they can do it. This is exactly how they can do it. They can treat this as a state-run newspaper kind of sort of thing outside of the commerce.
And the only way I see how to beat that, if what you're saying would be accurate, is to pose as a state-run news person to get a one-time message out before you get cut off.
But you would be up against this. And folks, why do you think there is this consolidation, this push for consolidation of everything that we're seeing? Because that way it bottlenecks.
This is why it's so important not to have infighting inside the only media that's trying to get the truth out.
Which thank you for bringing this up, because this is all part of our analysis. What we're seeing today is outside of the ego and pride. I broke this first, or I'm the foremost authority. I've been doing this longer than you have, and so on. Aside from that, if you look at what is taking place, you're looking at this marginalization of watchmen. And you're looking at the self-destruction of certain watchmen because, and look, I mean, we see it in real time. I mean, we've got, we brought somebody on the air at one point, did everything possible for this individual, gave this individual the time, the venue, and so on, and all of a sudden, I had not heard from this person again, and now we're the scourge of all watchmen.
Yeah,
how does that happen? I mean,
and
seriously, how does that happen?
And as I said, this issue was brought up from a caller named Al who we met in Florida. Obviously that person needs prayer, because to be making up things and to spreading false accusations, you got to be in a bad place. If you're just attacking people that were your acquaintances, your fellow journalists, friends, whatever, it shows you where the world is going, and it's what the Bible said would happen. That the people, the mothers, and the families. It talks about how fathers will, tell on and kill their children. Children will kill their parents, and their daughters against mothers, fathers against daughters, brothers against brothers, in people's own families. So, how can we expect to have any type of uniformity or some type of allegiance in the alternative media, which is only trying to do the right thing?
Well, and this is one thing, again, Steve and I talked this morning for quite some time, and I can see a point where we will have a gathering of watchmen. There's always going to be flaws and little bumps in the road, but when you have a gathering of watchmen, which we intend to perhaps put together a redundant network of shows of various personalities with important information, and use multiple venues to get the word out. Believe me, look, we understand what we're facing. We understand that we could have our plug pulled at any time. It's unlikely that it'll be pulled like right away. However, we have to make plans for that eventuality. So that's exactly what we're doing, and I'm not going to get into detail or get or say who or what, but believe me when I say this, we take the threat seriously, and we can equate piece of news, okay? So we don't because there's a lot of news here to cover. We can equate this to a piece of news. For example, Hillary Clinton has come out and said, now some people will believe that she has been selected to be the next president of the United States. If you believe that, fine, okay? Well, what's going on here? Hillary Clinton, gun culture way out of balance is what she is now saying. She's taking particularly heavy aim at the industry. She answered a question back. Heavy aim?
From what? From her sea of no... She has no political office. She has... she's a potential presidential candidate with a huge bucket load of baggage. What authority is she?
She controls a great part of... Her and Bill control a great part of Washington.
So you're saying unelected...
Yes.
Unelected power brokers... No,
well, it'd be like Kissinger. Yeah, okay, all right. But the fact of the matter is, she back last year, yeah, okay. Here, I believe it was at the end of last month, said that the nation's gun culture has gotten way out of balance, and the U.S. needs to rein in the notion that, quote, anybody can have a gun anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, she doesn't think that's good for the people. I think that's what she said. I saw that article yesterday. Actually, I might even have it right here. Yeah, she was and has been always against the gun culture, as one would put it. And I do not have this with me, but yeah, she is a different type of Obama. She is a different type of a Bush. She's a different type of a Nixon. She's
the same type of CFR Trilateral Commission appointee. I mean, or not appointee, but member. I mean, we are being run by this cabal of non-governmental organizations via the Trilateral Commission and CFR, the Committee of 300, the Royal Institute, and so on and so forth.
The world governments have taken over or the world shadow Satanists have taken over all the world governments, all the financial, political, spiritual systems on this earth, and they run it. This is why we're told to get away from the world.
Right, but we can't get so far out of the way of the world that we don't have an effect in the world. I mean, we have to.
We can't be caught up by the things that, we can't be concerned with, the small things. We can't be concerned with things of this world and things of their system. We fight against it, but we cannot let it hinder what we're trying to do.
Correct. I just don't want people to think.
No, you don't just give up or step back and not do anything.
Thank you. You don't go in your closet
take a stand,
and sit there and pray for 24/7.
You speak out against it. You tell people that you share it with people who will listen. You do everything in your power legally to at the very least, warn people and lead them in the right direction.
Right. Which brings me, by the way, to Billy Bear. Billy Bear, we interviewed on Tuesday night. Remember Billy Bear, the parent, the attorney? It's the last entry on our website. I'm doing a comprehensive report on this that's including the contact numbers for the Guilford, New Hampshire school district. But I have a feeling after tonight things are going to be a little bit different because Billy Bear, I believe, now has finished his appearance with Megyn Kelly on Fox News. And I like to think, folks, that we had some level of influence in that. We elevated Billy Bear's situation. Of course, Billy Bear's the attorney who was the parent of a 13-year-old who was arrested for disorderly conduct, taken out of a school board meeting because he objected to a piece of smut being read as mandatory for his daughter's class.
Yeah, and I think I read you this story that was on Fox about the situation, but listen to what this New Hampshire school has come out and said. New Hampshire school defends sexually graphic novel. It says, I'm not even going to read the first line of this, it's gross, and it says, it's not exactly Nancy Drew, but that's the kind of sexually graphic content freshmen boys and girls are being exposed to at New Hampshire's Gifford High School without their parents' knowledge. And I'll post a link in the chat room. You can find this on Fox News. The title is New Hampshire School Defends Sexually Graphic Novel. I'm not going to read these excerpts here. But the novel is based on...
This is Common Core, buddy.
Right. And it goes on to say, William Bear became furious when he learned that his daughter had been assigned the book. He said the school not only failed to notify parents, but they also failed to offer parents a chance to opt their kids out of reading the book. Bear, who is an attorney, put it in perspective. He said if someone had been handling those passages to students off campus, they might have been arrested. Ironically, it was Bear who got arrested at a school board meeting to address the controversy. When Bear went beyond his allotted 2 minutes and then got into an argument with a parent who supported the book.
And let me tell you something. He was set up right from the beginning. The principal had the backstory to this, which you're not going to hear on Fox, is the principal knew that Billy Bear was loaded for bear, so to speak, pun intended. That hey, he was going to file his objection at the school board. So right away they institute this arbitrary 2-minute rule where you can't ask questions, you can't have a dialogue, you can only speak for 2 minutes, and when your 2 minutes is over, you have to sit down. And they, of course, attributed this to this mass turnout of people at this school board meeting, when in fact only less than 4 dozen people actually turned out, and less than a third or even a fourth of that wanted to speak. Yeah, if that.
Well, listen to this. Superintendent Kent Hemingway told this author in a telephone interview, this author is Todd Starnes, that the principal contacted every family in the affected classes and polled them on whether or not they supported the racy novel. More than 80% consented with their students continuing with the book. 10% said no. He said 10% were undecided on whether or not they wanted their youngsters to read about lovers grinding their loins.
Something to me that's a bunch of bunk, and anyone who believes that falls for that. is an imbecile. That's my opinion.
Right.
Because I'm going to tell you something, folks. You've got either you've got a clueless, immoral society. I'd like to see, number one, how that alleged poll was structured. How many people were polled? I want to see open up your books here and let's take a look at exactly what you said, how you said it, what questions you raised. What kind of BS poll is that? These people are immoral. They lack integrity. They lack character, and they think that they're above you because they sit behind a table. They've got a little nameplate, and they've got this Napoleon-type complex of authority against the people with children. And the real victims here are the children. Let's not forget that. The kids.
And this brings me to what I was going to say. This reminds me of what Melissa Harris Perry said on her MSNBC commercial. We have to get away from the idea that children belong to their parents, and rather they belong to the community or the state. She says, this is what you're seeing. You're seeing children being hauled off in buses and taken to stadiums for drills of emergency preparedness without their parents' knowledge, when you have to get a permission slip signed just to take a field trip off school premises. You're seeing them, replace the curriculum, not only to the point where, it already was dumbed down, but at least there was some resemblance of the old curriculum. Now they're turning it to it's like a foreign entity. It is like taking Hollywood, the worst of Hollywood, the pornography industry, the graphic, nasty movies, and taking that and inserting it into the curriculum instead of intelligent, pure things that children should be learning about.
I just thought of something here. Seriously, if I would have been at that school board meeting with Billy Bear, and that police officer would have come over to Billy Bear and said, you're under arrest, I would have stood up, and I would have hoped that others would have stood up and said, you know what, you arrest him, you arrest all of us. Or, because people have got to start making a stand. And I get emails all the time. Well, what do we do? What do we do? What can we do? When you're in a situation like that, when you've got one man standing up to a board and saying, look, this is wrong, and doing so not in an adversarial, contentious way, but making a point and then getting shut down because of some arbitrary ruling, then to me that smacks of fascism. And by the way, fascism is often equated with the right-wing neo-Nazi kind of ideology. Okay, well, you can have a progressive fascism, if you will, and that sounds like an oxymoron, but the fact of the matter is, you go
look at our government.
Oh, exactly. So one of the things that could have been done that wasn't done, but if I would have been there, I certainly would have loved to have been there and stood up and said, why do you take him away? You take me away. And then I would have scanned the crowd and said, anyone else? And hopefully others would have stood up as well. What is one cop, one school board going to do when you've got that type of presence? Now, you might say, well, that's just not right. Well, come on. Get some guts, okay? Make a stand.
And we'll probably have to talk with Mr. Bear how he's going to handle, the proceedings, but would it be,
my guess,
a few people show up there?
They're going to be dropped.
Before there's even the arraignment?
Absolutely. My
without
thought on
fine,
this,
without
they're going to dismiss the charges.
I don't know.
Folks, mark my words, man.
That was some disorderly conduct if I've ever seen it.
Oh yeah, he was smacking around that cop, and Billy Bear had him in a headlock. And no, I'm kidding, folks. Of course not. But the YouTube, I've got a link to the YouTube. Go to the second YouTube. His daughter stands up and is one of the most eloquent 14-year-old young ladies I've seen, and in 15 seconds provides a 15-second statement, roughly 14 seconds, baby, to the school board. And boy, I'll tell you, I would be very proud to have her as my daughter, and she put them in their place. very nicely, as a matter of fact. But
as nice as you could in that situation. I mean,
yeah.
I wonder what, it'd be interesting to hear beyond what was said in that video, her opinion of the whole situation from, the beginning to end. What was going through her mind, what was as things as she understood it, and how she understands them now, if anything's changed, if how much of a learning experience this has been.
Oh, well, he had mentioned on our program, and folks, again, Billy Bear, we had him on Tuesday night for those for those who weren't with us or for whatever reason. He provided a lot of information on Tuesday night that caused quite a stir. It went viral on the internet, and of course, Fox News Tonight interviewed them. He confided in me information that I'll be putting it together in a report. I was supposed to do this last night. You can only, I can tell you, there's only so many hours in a day, so many phone calls you can take, so many people you can talk to. But there's some information coming out that people have to know about this. Common Core is behind this. The National, National Council on Governors behind this on a larger scale. And look, we have got to stand up. We've got to make a stand, fight, and say we're not going to take this anymore. Even if we know trouble is coming down the road, even if we know that we're going to lose some battles, we do know that we're going to win the war, at least in the book of life. And maybe this sounds trite, but in the book of life, I want my name to be on the proper side, or the right, correct book of life. I don't want my name in the book where it's your name's over here on the Manhattan telephone size book of people who really never gave a doggone. Boy, what I was going to say was not nice, but who never cared or who never bothered to stand for anything. Because if you don't bother to stand for anything, you'll accept everything, and that's not how we are meant to be. And this is a conversation that we've got to have. I believe. I believe that this is a larger conversation that involves all aspects of society. We have to make a stand, and we have to stick together. Those of us who are the remnant. I was again talking to Steve this morning. What an aptly named conference title, Whitestone Remnant Conference. I do feel that we're going to, folks. I do believe that there will be. Well, Bush talked about 1,000 points of light. Of course, that was an Illuminati reference for those people who are in the know. That was an Illuminati reference, the 1,000 points of light. But we can be tens of thousands of individual, tens of millions of individual lights for the book of life against their Illuminati twinkles. And this is where we must be.
Absolutely. I don't know if you saw this. Lois Lerner is being held in contempt of Congress.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have. But where's the meat? That woman from the Wendy's commercial back in the, 70s, 80s, where's the beef? Where's the meat here? Yeah,
we'll see if anything comes of it. I thought it was interesting, though, to say the least. And this, from the Washington Times, Obama court nominee, Harvard Law School scholar David Barron, an Obama administration nominee for Federal Appeals Court, has said this. He is also the author of government memos that make legal justification for the killing of U.S. citizens with drone strikes, which is why he's a selection to the U.S. First Circuit Court of Appeals has been delayed.
There will be an armed drone in every county in 5 years.
Yep. That was what was up there yesterday. And this is the ACLU took a stand and stepped in, and they're trying to make sure that this doesn't happen. But what we see here, it says, based on the entire career as a lawyer, I am content he will be an excellent judge from the First County. I support David Byrne's nomination from the Judiciary Committee and look forward to supporting his nominee. I lost my place. His confirmation on the Senate floor. That from Senator Leah Tencia. And it goes on. They're getting praise from he's getting praise from Democrats and Republicans. And the White House has agreed to allow lawmakers to review at least one of the drone memos after a U.S. Senator and the American Civil Liberties Union expressed concerns. Technology website ARS Technia reported Wednesday. So we'll see what comes of this, but I don't think that they're going to. They'll probably nominate him. I mean, remember the head of the FBI was asked the question: is it lawful for the government to kill American citizens on U.S. soil with drone strikes? And he did not know the answer to the question. He would not answer it in front of Congress.
I was going to say he would not answer it. The fact of the matter is there will be a drone strike on an American soil against an American. It will set the stage for future drone strikes, folks. You know, they're coming after us. There is a war against Christians in particular. Look, in Syria, what would you see in Syria in Iraq in particular, Afghanistan to a lesser extent, Egypt, they're going after Christians. They're crucifying Christians. Crucifixion's coming back. This is coming to America, and people have got to understand this and understand the weight, the importance behind having Obama selected, the importance of the Obama selection to usher in this particular time. The Arab Spring was a result of Obama being selected for the position. You understand the Arab Spring was long in planning by the Brits, by the French, by the Americans, by the globalists of all of these countries. In order to do this, Obama was part and parcel to the agenda. Folks, there's so much. Now, tomorrow night, Nathan Leal is going to be on the program. He's going to be talking more about his review of the Illuminati symbolism of the halftime Super Bowl, stuff that we're going to be seeing play out in painstaking detail. And I use that term intentionally, painstaking, because it will be somewhat tedious, as W's explanation was on Friday, which I thought was excellent. But it's going to be, Nathan Leal is going to talk about what we can expect, what messages were conveyed. The last thing I'm going to close with, I'm going to shut up then, Joe, and you can program. But here's the bottom line. If you watch what's going on with the entertainment industry, with the political parties and so on, you will find that messages are being conveyed among the people in the know and to the masses by requisite, by rule of those in power, by Satan's rules. Remember, Satan had to get permission to do certain things. That's where we're at. Bottom line is, we're going to be talking about this at length tomorrow, and this will give you a good idea of what is to come, whether you believe in Nathan's conclusions. Okay, it's different than the facts. The facts show, to me anyway, that he's right on the money.
With that, we're going to sign off. We had, for those joining us late, we had author Bill Salas on. His website, prophecydepotministries.net. Go back and listen to the archive if you missed the interview. It's talking about what's happening in Iran and Russia and America and Israel with Bible prophecy and some of what he covers in his books. He is the author of Psalm 83. He's the author of Israelistine, and he's coming out with a new book. Definitely go back and listen to that, and thanks, Bill, for coming on. It's nice having you back, because it's been a while. It's been a couple of years since we've had you.
I got to make a real quick clarification. Gary J. from Ohio sent me an email. Gary, it wasn't you. It wasn't you, buddy. No. Sorry.
All right, with that, till tomorrow night with Nathan Leal, stay safe, God bless, and we'll see you then.